Forbidden love behind family lies. What happens when the person you were forced to hate is the only one you've ever truly loved? I'm about to tell you a story that will leave you breathless about sacrifice, deception, and the devastating cost of living a lie. This is the story of Daniel Cross and Lena Moore, step-siblings, who spent 7 years pretending to despise each other to protect a family that was already falling apart. One winter night, trapped together in a mountain cabin, would shatter every carefully constructed wall between them and force them to confront a truth that could destroy everything they'd sacrificed to preserve. Stay with me until the very end of this journey, and if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The call came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Daniel Cross stood in his kitchen, phone pressed against his ear, watching his 6-year-old daughter Emma trace patterns in spilled orange juice on the counter. He could hear his stepmother Margaret's carefully controlled excitement even before she finished speaking. "I've already booked the cabin," Margaret said, her voice carrying that particular brightness that meant she'd made a decision and expected everyone else to fall in line. 3 bedrooms, beautiful view of the mountains, completely secluded. It'll be perfect for all of us to finally spend real time together. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Margaret, I don't think—" "Daniel, please." The brightness cracked slightly, revealing something more fragile underneath. "Your father and I, we need this. As a family, all of us together. You, Emma, Lena, everyone." There it was. The reason this call felt like a trap closing around him. Lena. "I have Emma," Daniel said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "A remote cabin in winter might not be the best—" "Emma will love it," Margaret interrupted. "There's sledding, the property has trails, and honestly, Daniel, when was the last time you took a real break? You work yourself to death at that garage." She wasn't wrong about that. Daniel had spent the last 7 years building a life that left no room for anything except work and Emma. 60-hour weeks at Cross Auto Repair, every spare moment dedicated to making sure his daughter had everything she needed, everyone she could depend on. No dating, no complications, no risks that might destabilize the careful balance he'd constructed. No room for mistakes, no room for the truth about Lena Moore. "Does Lena know about this?" Daniel asked. The pause on the other end told him everything. She'll be there. I've already talked to her." Of course Margaret had. His stepmother had spent 7 years trying to bridge the gap between her daughter and her stepson, never understanding that the hostility she witnessed wasn't real animosity at all. It was armor. Protection. The only way Daniel and Lena had found to survive in the same family without destroying everything their parents had built together. "I really don't think this is a good idea," Daniel said. "Daniel," Margaret's voice softened. "I know you and Lena have never gotten along. I know this family hasn't been easy for either of you, but she's your sister, and I'm asking you, both of you, to try. For your father and me. Please." The word sister landed like it always did, a knife between his ribs wrapped in propriety and expectation. Lena Moore was many things. His stepsister legally, yes, the daughter of the woman his father had married when Daniel was 19 and Lena was 18. But she had never, not for one single moment in the 8 years since their parents' wedding, felt like his sister. She'd felt like the person he couldn't have, the person he'd wanted anyway, the person who'd looked at him one night, 3 months after their parents' honeymoon, and said with perfect clarity, "We can't do this. It would destroy them. You know that, right?" And Daniel, still young enough to believe that sacrifice meant something, had agreed. They'd made a pact that night. In public, they would be distant, cold, barely tolerant of each other's presence. No warmth, no private jokes, no lingering eye contact that might give away what had almost happened between them. Their parents would have their happiness, their blended family, their second chance at love, and Daniel and Lena would pay the price. 7 years later, the price felt astronomical. "All right," Daniel heard himself say. "We'll come." Margaret's relief was audible. "Thank you. Thank you, sweetheart. You won't regret this." But Daniel already did. The cabin sat 2 hours north of the city, deep enough into the mountains that cell service became a suggestion rather than a guarantee. Daniel made the drive on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Emma buckled into her booster seat behind him, chattering about snow and sledding and whether they'd see deer. "Will Aunt Lena be there?" Emma asked as they wound through increasingly narrow roads flanked by towering pines. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Probably." "I like Aunt Lena," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She's nice to me. She sends me birthday cards with $20 in them." "That's very generous of her," Daniel managed. "Why don't you like her, Daddy?" The question was innocent, direct in the way only children's questions could be. Daniel had spent years crafting careful non-answers to variations of this inquiry. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Grandma Margaret says you and Aunt Lena just need to spend more time together. And Grandma Margaret says a lot of things. She says families should love each other even when it's hard." Daniel glanced in the rear-view mirror at his daughter's serious expression. Emma had his dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. Rachel had left when Emma was 11 months old, deciding that motherhood and Daniel Cross weren't what she wanted after all. The divorce had been quick, her departure quicker. She sent birthday cards twice a year and nothing else. "You're right," Daniel said quietly. "Families should love each other, even when it's hard." The cabin came into view around the next bend. It was larger than Daniel had expected, a sprawling structure of timber and stone with a wraparound porch and smoke already rising from the chimney. 2 cars were parked in the clearing, his father's sedan and a blue Honda Civic that made Daniel's stomach drop. Lena was already here. "It looks like a castle." Emma unbuckled herself before Daniel had fully stopped the truck, practically bouncing with excitement. "Can I go see inside?" "Wait for me," Daniel said, but Emma was already out the door, boots crunching on the thin layer of snow covering the ground. Daniel sat in the truck for a moment longer than necessary, watching his daughter run toward the cabin door. Through the front window he could see movement, his father Michael standing near the fireplace, Margaret in the kitchen area. And there, just visible in profile, was Lena. She'd cut her hair. It fell just past her shoulders now instead of down her back. She wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater, and even from this distance, even through glass and years of careful distance, Daniel felt the impact of seeing her the way he always did. Like gravity shifting, like coming home to a place he'd been exiled from. He forced himself out of the truck. Inside, the cabin smelled like pine and the beef stew Margaret had probably been cooking for hours. Emma had already been absorbed into Margaret's enthusiastic hug, was already being told about the hot chocolate waiting for her in the kitchen. Michael came forward to grip Daniel's shoulder, his father's version of affection, firm, brief, meaningful in its restraint. "Good drive?" Michael asked. "Fine. Roads are clear. For now, weather says snow tonight." Lena stood near the fireplace, hands in her pockets, watching this exchange with an expression Daniel had seen 1,000 times before. Polite. Distant. Perfectly neutral. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds before she looked away. "Lena," Daniel said, because Margaret was watching, because this was the performance they'd perfected. "Daniel." Her voice was cool, professional, the tone you'd use with a coworker you didn't particularly like but had to tolerate. "Good to see you." The lie sat between them, familiar as breathing. Emma, oblivious to the undercurrent, rushed over to Lena with the unguarded affection of children. "Aunt Lena! Daddy said you'd be here." Lena's expression softened immediately, all the careful neutrality melting away as she crouched to Emma's level. "Hey, Emma Bean. Look at you. You've gotten so tall." "I'm 6 3/4 now," Emma announced proudly. 6 3/4 is very sophisticated. Lena smiled, and Daniel had to look away because that smile, genuine, warm, unguarded, was the version of Lena he only saw when she thought he wasn't watching. "Did you bring your sled?" "Daddy has it in the truck." "Well, we'll have to test out those hills tomorrow then, won't we?" Watching them together hurt in ways Daniel had never found words for. Lena was good with Emma, had been since the first time Margaret had brought her around when Emma was barely 2 years old. She sent birthday cards, remembered Christmas, asked questions about school and friends and things Emma cared about. She showed up for Emma in ways she could never show up for Daniel, and he was grateful for it even as it carved something hollow in his chest. This was what they'd sacrificed, not just their own possibility, but moments like this, moments where they could exist in the same space without armor, without performance, without the constant weight of pretending. "Let me show you the rooms," Margaret said, herding everyone toward the hallway. "We've got 3 bedrooms. Michael and I are in the master, of course. Lena, you're in the room on the left. Daniel, you and Emma can have the room on the right." The cabin's layout became clear as they explored. The master bedroom sat at one end of the hall, spacious with its own bathroom. The 2 remaining bedrooms flanked the other end, smaller but comfortable, each with a single queen bed. Between them sat a shared bathroom. Daniel stood in the doorway of the room he'd share with Emma, watching his daughter immediately claim the side of the bed nearest the window. The walls were pine, the furniture simple but well made. Through the window, he could see the forest stretching endlessly, already fading into early winter darkness despite the afternoon hour. Across the hall, Lena was unpacking her bag with precise, efficient movements. She'd always been like that, methodical, organized, every action deliberate. Daniel had watched her move through the world this way for years, had memorized the patterns of her existence from a careful distance. She glanced up, caught him watching. Her hand stilled on the sweater she was folding. Neither of them spoke. Emma's voice broke the moment. "Daddy, can I have hot chocolate now?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Come on." Dinner that first night was exactly the kind of forced family bonding Margaret had clearly envisioned. The dining table sat near the massive stone fireplace, close enough that the flames cast dancing shadows across the walls. Margaret had made enough food for twice their number: stew, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, apple pie for dessert. Daniel sat across from Lena, a seating arrangement that felt both accidental and inevitable. Emma sat between Daniel and Margaret, chattering about school and her friend Sophia and the upcoming winter concert where she'd be singing Jingle Bells as part of the first-grade chorus. "You should come," Emma said, looking at Lena with open hopefulness. "It's next Friday at 7. Lena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I'm not sure I can make it next Friday, Emma Bean. I have a work thing." "What kind of work thing?" Emma asked with the relentless curiosity of 6-year-olds. "Just a project deadline," Lena said, her tone carefully light. "I work in marketing for a tech company. Sometimes we have to stay late when we're launching new products." "That sounds boring," Emma declared. "Emma," Daniel said quietly, "that's not polite." "No, she's right," Lena said, and there was something almost amused in her expression. "It is boring sometimes, but it pays the bills." "Daddy works on cars," Emma announced, as if this was news. "He can fix anything." "Can he now?" Lena's eyes flicked to Daniel, held for a moment longer than was safe. "He fixed Mr. Patterson's truck when it wouldn't start," Emma continued, "and he built me a bookshelf for my room that looks like a dollhouse." "Your dad is very talented," Lena said, and the words were aimed at Emma, but felt like they carried weight meant for Daniel alone. Michael, who'd been quietly eating, spoke up. "Daniel's always been good with his hands. Takes after his grandfather. The man could rebuild an engine blindfolded." "Not blindfolded," Daniel said, "but close." Margaret smiled. "It's wonderful, really, how you've built that business from nothing. Your grandfather would be so proud." The business. Cross Auto Repair. Daniel had inherited it when his grandfather died 5 years ago, a struggling garage with more debt than customers. He'd spent every waking hour since then turning it around, building a reputation for honest work and fair prices, slowly transforming it into something stable enough to support Emma and himself. It was also the perfect excuse for why he was never available for family gatherings, why he couldn't make holidays or weekend trips, why he lived an hour away instead of closer. It was the infrastructure of distance he'd built to survive loving Lena from afar. "Thank you," Daniel said to Margaret. "I'm trying." "You're doing more than trying," Lena said quietly, and when Daniel looked up, her expression was unguarded in a way that made his chest tighten. "You're raising a beautiful kid and running a business. That's not nothing, Daniel." The use of his name, spoken directly to him without the usual cool detachment, sent something dangerous through the air between them. Michael and Margaret didn't seem to notice, but Daniel felt it like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. "Well," Margaret said brightly, standing to clear plates, "I'm just so happy we're all here together. It's been too long." Let me help, Lena said immediately, gathering dishes. Daniel stood as well. I'll get Emma ready for bed. It's only 7:30, Emma protested. 7:45, Daniel corrected, and you were up early. Come on, teeth and pajamas. Emma grumbled, but complied, and Daniel escaped the dining room before the weight of Lena's presence across from him became more than he could carry with a neutral expression. Later, after Emma had been read 2 stories and tucked in with her worn stuffed rabbit, Daniel stood in the shared bathroom brushing his teeth and trying not to think about the fact that Lena was probably doing the same thing 30 feet away through 2 closed doors. He failed. The cabin had settled into quiet. Through the walls, he could hear the low murmur of his father and Margaret talking in the master bedroom. The fireplace crackled in the main room. Outside, wind had picked up, rattling the windows with the promise of the snow Michael had mentioned. Daniel finished in the bathroom, checked once more that Emma was sleeping peacefully, and then stood in the hallway uncertain where to go. The bedroom felt too confined, the main room too exposed. He'd spent 7 years avoiding situations exactly like this, trapped in close quarters with Lena, nowhere to escape, nothing to do but feel the weight of everything they weren't saying. He found himself walking toward the main room anyway. Lena sat on the couch nearest the fireplace, a book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was staring into the flames, her profile outlined in gold and shadow, looking like something out of a painting Daniel couldn't afford to want. She looked up when he entered. Couldn't sleep? Emma's out cold. I'm just restless. The storm's getting worse. Lena gestured toward the window where snow had begun to fall in earnest, thick flakes that seemed to glow in the porch light. We might be snowed in by morning. Margaret will love that. More quality family time. The sarcasm in his voice was sharper than he'd intended. Lena's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. She means well. I know she does. Silence stretched between them, filled with the snap of burning wood and the howl of wind against the cabin walls. Daniel should leave, should go back to his room, close the door, maintain the distance that had kept them both safe for 7 years. Instead, he sat in the chair across from Lena's couch. Her eyes tracked the movement, something unreadable flickering across her expression. Daniel? Whatever she was going to say was interrupted by the sound of a door opening. Margaret appeared in the hallway, wrapped in a thick robe, her expression concerned. The heat just went out, she said. No. The heating system was located in a closet off the kitchen. Daniel crouched in front of it, examining the unit while Michael held a flashlight and Lena stood in the doorway watching. Pilot light's out, Daniel said after a moment. And I can't get it to relight. Is it broken? Margaret asked, worry creeping into her voice. Could be the thermocouple, could be a gas supply issue. Hard to tell without the right tools, and I didn't exactly bring my work kit on a family vacation. Can it wait until morning? Michael asked. Daniel stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. The storm's getting worse. Even if we could get someone out here, which I doubt, it won't be tonight. The fireplace will keep the main room warm, but the bedrooms are going to get cold. How cold? Margaret asked. Uncomfortably cold by midnight, potentially dangerous by morning if this storm is as bad as it looks. Michael and Margaret exchanged glances, a wordless communication born of years together. We could all sleep in the main room, Margaret suggested. Bring out blankets, make pallets by the fireplace. Emma would love that, Daniel said, but there's not really enough space for 5 people comfortably. The master bedroom has its own fireplace, Michael said slowly. Margaret and I will be fine. Emma can sleep between you and Lena on the couch. It pulls out into a bed. The suggestion landed like a grenade. Daniel's immediate instinct was to refuse, to find any alternative, to maintain the careful distance that made existing in the same family as Lena more survivable. But Emma was 6 years old and the temperature was already dropping. His comfort, or Lena's, couldn't be the priority. That works, Daniel said, keeping his voice level. Lena? Margaret looked at her daughter with maternal concern. Lena's expression was perfectly controlled, but Daniel knew her well enough to see the tension in her shoulders. Of course. Whatever keeps Emma warm. It's settled then, Margaret said, relief clear in her voice. Let me get extra blankets. 20 minutes later, the pull-out couch had been transformed into a bed. Emma, roused from sleep and told about the special camping adventure in the main room, was delighted. She claimed the middle position immediately, snuggling under the pile of quilts Margaret had provided. "This is like a sleepover," Emma declared, her earlier drowsiness forgotten in the excitement of something different. "A very cold sleepover," Lena said, but she was smiling as she helped tuck blankets around Emma's small form. Daniel stood at the edge of the makeshift bed, looking at the configuration with something like dread. Emma in the middle was non-negotiable. She needed to be warmest, safest, protected on both sides, which meant Daniel and Lena would flank her, separated by 30 pounds of 6-year-old and nothing else. Closer than they'd been in 7 years. "Daddy, come on," Emma said, patting the space beside her. "I'm cold." Daniel climbed under the blankets. Emma immediately pressed against his side, her body heat negligible, but her presence grounding. Across the narrow bed, Lena settled into her own space, careful to maintain distance even as Emma's sprawled sleeping position would inevitably push them all closer together as the night wore on. Margaret and Michael made one more pass through the main room, ensuring the fire was stoked, the windows were secured against the storm, and everyone had enough blankets. "Good night," Margaret said, pausing to kiss Emma's forehead. "Sleep well, all of you." "Night, Grandma," Emma murmured, already half asleep again. Then Michael turned off the lights, and the cabin fell into darkness broken only by firelight. Emma was asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood slumber. Daniel lay rigid on his side, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of every sound, every shift of the bed, every breath Lena took on the other side of his daughter. The storm hammered against the windows. The fire crackled and popped. And in the darkness, with Emma sleeping between them like both a shield and a reminder of everything at stake, Daniel felt 7 years of careful distance dissolving with each passing minute. "Daniel?" Lena's voice was so quiet he almost missed it under the sound of the storm. "Yeah? Are you awake?" It was such an absurd question that he almost laughed. "Yeah." Silence. Then, "This is ridiculous, isn't it?" "What is?" "All of it. The pretending, the distance, the fact that we're lying here in the same bed and can't even look at each other because of a decision we made when we were barely adults." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. "Lena, I know we agreed. I know why we did it. I just—" She paused, and in the firelight, he could see her turn her head toward him, though Emma's sleeping form blocked most of his view. "Do you ever regret it?" The question was dangerous. Honest answers were weapons that could detonate everything they'd built to protect their parents' happiness. But lying here in the dark, with the storm sealing them inside this cabin and 7 years of pretending pressing down on him like physical weight, Daniel found he didn't have the energy for anything but truth. "Every single day," he said quietly. He heard her breath catch. "Me too." Emma shifted between them, one small arm flinging out to rest across Daniel's chest, her face turning toward Lena. Even in sleep, she was building bridges neither of them could cross while awake. "She's amazing," Lena said, looking down at Emma with an expression Daniel couldn't fully read. "You've done such a good job with her, Daniel. Alone. That can't have been easy." "It hasn't been. But she's worth it." "I know. I can see that." Lena's hand, almost of its own accord, smoothed a strand of hair back from Emma's forehead. The gesture was tender, maternal, and it did something to Daniel's chest that felt like breaking. Do you ever wish things had been different? That Rachel had stayed, that you'd had the family you planned?" Daniel thought about his ex-wife, the woman who'd looked at him 3 months after Emma's birth and said she'd made a mistake, that she didn't love him enough, didn't want motherhood enough, didn't want the life they'd stumbled into together. "No," he said honestly. "Rachel leaving was hard, but I don't think we would have worked long-term anyway. We were too young, too unprepared. She did me a favor by being honest about what she wanted." "Which was?" "Not me, not Emma, not the life of a mechanic's wife in a small town." He paused. "She sends birthday cards twice a year. That's the extent of her involvement." "I'm sorry, don't be." "Don't. Emma has everything she needs. She has me, she has my dad and Margaret, she has—" He stopped before saying she has you, because that felt like crossing a line even in this already dangerous conversation. But Lena heard it anyway. "She has me," Lena finished quietly. For whatever that's worth. It's worth more than you know. Another silence, this one heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Outside, the storm had intensified, snow battering the windows with enough force that Daniel wondered if they'd be able to leave in the morning, even if they wanted to. "Can I ask you something?" Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yeah." If things were different, if we weren't who we are to each other legally, if our parents hadn't gotten married, if we just met as strangers somewhere, do you think... She trailed off, but Daniel knew what she was asking. He'd asked himself the same question 1,000 times over 7 years. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." He felt rather than saw the impact of that word land. Lena went very still, her breathing shallow enough that he could barely hear it over the fire and the storm. "I was 19 when I first saw you," Daniel said, the words coming despite every instinct telling him to stop. "My dad had been dating Margaret for about 3 months, and he invited me over for dinner to meet her officially. You walked into that restaurant wearing a blue dress, and I remember thinking I'd never seen anyone more beautiful in my life. Daniel, I know we can't, but you asked what I thought, and that's the truth. Even before I knew who you were, before I knew you were going to be my stepsister, I looked at you and thought, this person could change everything." "And then I did," Lena said, her voice rough. "Just not the way either of us wanted." "No, not the way we wanted." Emma made a small sound in her sleep, shifting closer to Lena, and Daniel watched as Lena's arm came around his daughter instinctively, protectively. The sight of it, Lena holding Emma like she belonged there, like this family configuration was anything other than an impossible fiction, hurt more than Daniel had words for. "I wanted kids," Lena said suddenly. "Did you know that? Before everything got so complicated, I wanted to be a mother someday, have a family, the whole thing. And now? Now I'm 31 and single, and I've convinced myself that work is enough, that being Aunt Lena is enough." Her voice cracked slightly. "But it's not, Daniel. It's never been enough." Daniel closed his eyes against the ache in her words. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. I don't even know why I'm telling you this. Maybe it's the storm, or the dark, or the fact that we're lying in the same bed for the first time in 7 years, and it feels like the universe is laughing at us." She paused. "Or maybe I'm just tired of pretending that I'm okay with how things are." "Are you saying you want to stop pretending?" The question hung in the darkness between them, enormous and terrifying and possibly the most dangerous thing either of them had said in years. "I don't know what I'm saying," Lena admitted. "I just know that I've spent 7 years being cold to you in public, and professional and distant, and every single time I do it, it feels like dying a little. And tonight, lying here with your daughter between us, I can't keep acting like I don't..." She stopped, the sentence unfinished, but Daniel heard everything she couldn't say. "Like you don't what?" he asked, even though he knew, even though hearing her say it would shatter whatever fragile control he'd maintained over this situation. "Like I don't still think about that night," Lena said, her voice barely audible. 3 months after our parents got married. Your apartment, the conversation we had about what we couldn't do, what we couldn't risk, what we had to sacrifice to keep our parents happy." Daniel remembered. Of course he remembered. It was seared into his memory with perfect clarity. Lena sitting on his couch, tears on her face, saying they had to make a choice between what they wanted and what was right. Daniel had agreed because he'd been young enough to believe that sacrifice was noble, that protecting his father's happiness was more important than his own. 7 years later, the nobility felt hollow. "I think about it too," Daniel said. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd chosen differently?" "Every day." "Would it have been worth it? The fallout, the hurt, the damage to our parents' marriage?" Daniel looked at Emma sleeping between them, her small face peaceful and trusting. He thought about the life he'd built, the business, the routine, the careful isolation that kept him safe from risks he couldn't afford to take. And he thought about Lena, who sent birthday cards with $20 in them, who showed up for Emma in ways she could never show up for him, who'd spent 7 years being exactly what their agreement demanded, and nothing more. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know that what we chose has cost us more than I think either of us realized it would." Lena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that sounded like 7 years of accumulation finally breaking through. I have something I need to tell you. About our parents. Daniel's stomach dropped. What about them? They're separating, Daniel. Your dad told my mom last month. They're waiting until after the holidays to make it official, but it's happening. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? They've been struggling for a while, apparently. Different priorities, different life goals. Your dad wants to travel, retire early. My mom wants to stay rooted, keep working. They've been growing apart for the last 2 years, and they finally admitted it's not working. Daniel stared at the ceiling, trying to process what she was telling him. Margaret invited us all here knowing they were about to divorce. She wanted one last family gathering before everything changed, one last chance to pretend we were all okay. Lena's laugh was bitter. Ironic, isn't it? We spent 7 years protecting a marriage that was already dying. The revelation reordered everything. 7 years of careful distance, of pretending, of sacrificing what they'd wanted for a stability that had never actually existed. 7 years of lying to themselves about what they were protecting. When were you going to tell me? Daniel asked. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't going to. Maybe I was just going to let you find out with everyone else. She paused. But lying here, listening to you talk about choices and regret, I couldn't let you keep thinking we gave it all up for something that lasted. Daniel felt something enormous shifting in his chest, years of careful justification crumbling under the weight of this new information. So it was for nothing. Not nothing. Your dad had 7 years of trying. My mom had 7 years of hope. But yeah, Daniel, we gave up 7 years of our own lives for a marriage that was going to end anyway. Emma stirred between them, her small hand reaching out in sleep to grasp Lena's sleeve. Neither of them moved, both frozen by the child between them and the truth that was finally, impossibly, being spoken aloud. I don't know what to do with this, Daniel said finally. Me either. The fire had burned down to embers, the room cooling despite the pile of blankets. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. They were trapped here, all of them, in this cabin, in this night, in the consequences of decisions made when they were too young to understand what they were trading away. Can I ask you something else? Lena said. Yeah. That night at your apartment, before we made our agreement, do you remember what you said to me? Daniel remembered every word. I said I thought I could fall in love with you if we let ourselves. And I said I thought I already had. Lena's voice broke slightly. And then we agreed to never talk about it again. Lena, I never stopped, she said, the words tumbling out fast and desperate like they'd been held back too long. I never stopped, Daniel. 7 years of being cold to you, 7 years of building a separate life, 7 years of dating other people and pretending I was moving on, and I never stopped. Not for one single day. Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but lie there in the darkness with Emma sleeping between them and the truth finally, devastatingly, completely exposed. I've been in love with you for 8 years, Lena continued, and I've spent 7 of them pretending I wasn't, and I can't do it anymore, Daniel. I can't spend one more family gathering being cold to you. I can't send one more birthday card to Emma and pretend it doesn't kill me that I can't be more to her. I can't watch you build this life without me and act like it's fine. It's not fine, Daniel said roughly. It's never been fine. So what do we do? It was the question neither of them had an answer to. Emma was between them, literally and figuratively. A child who needed stability, who needed her father to be present and focused and not distracted by impossible complications. Daniel's business was an hour away. Lena's job was in the city. Their parents were divorcing, which removed the original reason for their agreement, but didn't magically solve the logistics of 2 lives built in careful separation. And beyond all that, there was fear. Fear that they'd built this up too much in their minds, that 7 years of longing had created an impossible standard, that the reality of being together couldn't possibly live up to the fantasy they'd constructed. I don't know, Daniel admitted, but I know I'm tired of lying. Me too. Emma shifted again, this time rolling more fully toward Lena, her small body seeking warmth. Lena's arm tightened around her, and Daniel saw tears on Lena's face catching the dim glow of the dying fire. She's so perfect, Lena whispered. And I've missed so much, Daniel. 7 years of being held at arm's length from both of you. 7 years of being Aunt Lena instead of... Instead of what? Daniel asked gently. Instead of someone who matters. Someone who gets to be part of her life in a real way. Someone who... She stopped, swallowing hard. Someone who could love her the way I already do. The confession hung in the air between them, enormous and vulnerable and so close to crossing lines they'd spent years defending. Daniel looked at Lena holding his daughter, looked at the tears on her face and the careful tenderness in the way she touched Emma's hair, and felt something crack wide open in his chest. You already matter, he said, to both of us, more than you know. But not in the way I want to, not in any way that's real or lasting or... Lena's voice broke completely. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be saying any of this. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to Emma. It's just true, Daniel interrupted. It's just true. Lena looked up at him then, really looked at him for the first time in 7 years without the armor of pretense between them. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy from crying, her hair falling out of the ponytail she'd tied it back in. She looked wrecked and honest and more beautiful than any version of careful control she'd ever shown him. What are we going to do? She asked again, this time sounding lost. I don't know, but we have all night to figure it out. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the fire burned down to almost nothing. And between them, Emma slept the deep, peaceful sleep of childhood innocence, unaware that the two adults she loved were finally, after 7 years of silence, telling each other the truth. The night was long and dark and far from over, and neither of them looked away. The confession settled between them like fallout, reshaping the landscape of everything they'd carefully constructed over 7 years. Daniel stared at the ceiling beams, watching shadows from the dying fire dance across the wood, trying to find solid ground in a conversation that had demolished every safe boundary they'd maintained. When did you know? He asked finally, his voice rough. That you couldn't keep pretending. Lena was quiet for a moment, her hand still resting protectively on Emma's sleeping form. Emma's 5th birthday party, do you remember? Daniel remembered. Margaret had insisted on hosting it at her house, had invited half of Emma's kindergarten class, had turned it into the kind of elaborate production that made Daniel uncomfortable, but that Emma had loved. He'd showed up late because of a breakdown at the shop, had walked into chaos of balloons and screaming children and cake everywhere. And Lena had been there, sitting on the floor with Emma and 3 other girls, teaching them how to make friendship bracelets. You were covered in glitter, Daniel said. Emma dumped an entire bottle on my head. Lena's voice carried a ghost of laughter. And I was sitting there watching her laugh, watching you watch her from across the room, and I thought, this is what I'm missing, this exact thing, these moments. You were there for that moment. As Aunt Lena. As the stepsister who sends birthday cards and shows up for required family events, not as someone who... She stopped, searching for words. Not as someone who gets to matter in the everyday parts. The homework help and the bedtime stories and the scraped knees. I get the highlight reel, Daniel. I've never gotten the actual life. Emma shifted between them, her small face scrunching up briefly before relaxing back into sleep. Both of them froze, waiting to see if she'd wake, but her breathing evened out again within seconds. I wanted to ask you to stay that day, Daniel said quietly. After everyone left and it was just me and Emma cleaning up wrapping paper. I wanted to ask if you'd help us, if you'd stay for dinner, if you'd be part of the ordinary moments instead of just the special ones. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know how to ask for that without asking for everything else I couldn't have. Lena made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. We're idiots, you know that? We've wasted 7 years being careful when we both wanted the same thing. We were trying to do the right thing. For who? Not for us, and apparently not for our parents either, since they're splitting up anyway. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. We sacrificed 7 years for a marriage that was already broken. How is that the right thing? Daniel didn't have an answer. The justification that had sustained him through 7 years of distance felt hollow now, exposed as the flimsy rationalization it had always been. They'd been 19 and 18, scared of hurting their parents, convinced that their own happiness mattered less than maintaining family peace. They'd been wrong. "My mom told me 3 weeks ago," Lena said. "We were having coffee and she just came out with it, said she and your dad had grown apart, that they wanted different things, that staying together felt like lying to each other." Lena's voice dropped lower. "And all I could think was, we lied to ourselves for them. We gave up everything for them, and they couldn't even make it work." "Does she know?" Daniel asked. "About us? About what we gave up?" "No, how could she? We've been so convincing that I think she genuinely believes we can't stand each other." Lena paused. "Actually, she apologized to me about it at that same coffee. Said she was sorry she'd brought me into a family situation where her daughter and stepson couldn't get along. Said she felt like she'd failed us both by not somehow making us friends." The irony was so sharp it hurt. "What did you say?" "I told her it wasn't her fault, that some people just don't mesh." Lena's hand moved unconsciously over Emma's hair, the gesture so tender it made Daniel's chest ache. "I've gotten very good at lying to my mother about how I feel about you. I've gotten good at lying to everyone." "Is that what you tell yourself at night, that you're protecting people by lying?" The question had edges. Daniel recognized the anger underneath it, the frustration of 7 years finally finding voice. "I tell myself I'm keeping Emma's life stable, that I'm being the parent she needs instead of the mess I'd be if I let myself feel everything I've been pushing down." "And how's that working out for you?" "It's not," Daniel admitted. "It's never worked, but I didn't know what else to do." The fire had nearly died completely, only a few glowing embers remaining. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and Daniel could feel Lena shivering despite the pile of blankets. He wanted to pull her closer, to share warmth the way they were both trying to warm Emma, but the invisible boundaries between them felt more solid than the sleeping child. "We should add wood to the fire," Lena said, clearly feeling the cold too. Daniel carefully extracted himself from the blankets, moving slowly so as not to disturb Emma. The floor was shockingly cold against his bare feet as he crossed to the fireplace. Lena joined him, both of them working in practiced silence to build up the fire again. Daniel arranging logs while Lena used the poker to redistribute embers. Standing here in the semi-darkness, working together on something as simple as building a fire, felt dangerously domestic. Like a glimpse of an alternate timeline where this was normal, where they could stand shoulder to shoulder without carefully maintained distance. "I'm scared," Lena said suddenly, still focused on the fire. "Of what happens if we stop pretending." "Me too. What if it ruins everything? What if we try and it doesn't work, and then we can't even be Aunt Lena and distant stepbrother anymore? What if we lose even the little bit we have?" Daniel set down the last log and turned to face her. Firelight painted her profile in gold, highlighted the worry lines between her eyebrows, caught on the tears still drying on her cheeks. "What if it works?" "That's almost scarier." "Why?" "Because then we have to admit we wasted 7 years. Because then we have to figure out how to build a life together when we've spent so long building separate ones. Because then Emma—" Lena's voice broke. "Because then Emma gets attached to me in a real way, and if it falls apart, she's the one who gets hurt. Emma already loves you. As Aunt Lena. As the person who sends birthday cards and shows up twice a year. Not as—" She stopped, seemingly unable to finish the sentence. "Not as what?" Daniel asked gently. "Not as someone permanent? Not as someone who could be a real part of her life?" "Not as someone who could be her mother," Lena whispered, and the words hung in the air between them like a confession too large to take back. Daniel felt the impact of it in his chest, in his throat, in every careful defense he'd built against wanting exactly this. "Lena, I know that's not something you can promise, or that I have any right to want. She has a mother, even if Rachel doesn't act like it, and I'm just the stepsister who's been kept at arm's length for 7 years. I have no claim to her." "That's not true." "Isn't it? What am I to Emma really? What have I been allowed to be?" Daniel thought about the birthday cards, the Christmas presents, the way Emma's face lit up when she saw Lena. He thought about how Lena remembered every detail Emma shared, asked follow-up questions about friends and school, and things that mattered to a 6-year-old. He thought about the friendship bracelets and the glitter and the way Lena had looked at his daughter with something like hunger. "You've been exactly what I was afraid of," Daniel said finally. "Someone Emma could love. Someone who could break both our hearts if this doesn't work." Lena turned to face him fully, the fire crackling behind them, the cabin still and quiet except for the storm raging outside. They were standing close enough that Daniel could see the individual tears on her lashes, close enough to touch if either of them was brave enough to close the distance. "I would never hurt her," Lena said fiercely. "Whatever happens between us, whatever we decide, I would never walk away from Emma the way Rachel did." "You have to believe that." "I do. That's what terrifies me." "Why?" "Because it means if we try this, if we stop pretending and let ourselves want what we've been denying, the stakes aren't just us anymore. It's Emma too. It's her stability, her sense of family, her ability to trust people who say they'll stay." Lena reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement like she was approaching something fragile, and placed her hand on Daniel's arm. The touch was electric after years of careful avoidance, years of making sure they never stood too close or made contact that lasted longer than socially necessary. "Then we don't fail," Lena said simply. "We figure it out. We make it work. Because the alternative, going back to the way things were, pretending we don't feel this, watching each other live half-lives from across family dinner tables, I can't do that anymore, Daniel. I physically cannot survive more years of that." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when we leave this cabin, when the storm clears and real life comes back, we make a choice. A different choice than the one we made 7 years ago." Her hand tightened on his arm. "We choose each other. We choose the truth. We choose to stop protecting a marriage that's already over and start building something that could actually last." Daniel covered her hand with his own, finally, after 7 years, allowing himself the simple intimacy of touching her with intention. "It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. Emma comes first, always. That's not negotiable. I wouldn't want it any other way. And we take it slow. We don't rush in to be—" Daniel gestured vaguely at the space between them. "We figure out what this is before we disrupt her entire life." "Agreed. And if it doesn't work, if we try and realize we've built this up too much in our heads, we're honest about it. We don't drag it out and make it worse." Lena's expression flickered with something that might have been hurt, but she nodded. "Okay." They stood there in the firelight, hands clasped. 7 years of distance finally collapsed into this moment of fragile honesty. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks up the chimney, and both of them startled slightly, the spell breaking. "We should get back to Emma before she wakes up and wonders where we went," Lena said, but she didn't move to pull her hand away. "Yeah." Neither of them moved for another long moment. Then Daniel did something he'd wanted to do for 8 years. He lifted Lena's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture of promise and possibility and everything they'd denied themselves. Lena's breath caught. "Daniel, I know, slow, I know." He lowered her hand but didn't release it. "But if we're doing this, if we're choosing truth, then I need you to know something." "Oh, what?" "I've been in love with you since that night in my apartment. Since before that, probably. And nothing about the last 7 years changed that. Not the distance, not the pretending, not the life I built trying to get over you. None of it worked." Lena's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you need to know what you're signing up for. This isn't curiosity or attraction or wondering what if. This is—" He struggled for words adequate to the enormity of what he felt. "This is everything, Lena. It always has been." She pulled her hand free, and for a horrible moment Daniel thought he'd said too much, pushed too hard, scared her away. But then both her hands came up to frame his face, her touch gentle, despite the intensity in her expression. "You're not the only one who's been carrying this for 7 years, she said. "You're not the only one who tried to move on, and couldn't. You're not the only one who looked across family dinner tables and wanted to scream because we were so close and so impossibly far apart at the same time." "Lena, I love you," she said, the words fierce and definitive. "I have loved you through every awkward family gathering, through every cold interaction, through every year of pretending you were nothing more than an obligation. I love you, and I'm done hiding it." Daniel had imagined this moment in 1,000 different variations over 7 years. Late at night, when he couldn't sleep, during long drives with nothing but his thoughts for company, in the space between waking and dreaming where impossible things felt briefly real. But none of his imagining had prepared him for the actual weight of hearing Lena say those words, for the way they seemed to rearrange his entire internal landscape. "We're really doing this," he said, half question, half statement of fact. "We're really doing this." "Our parents are going to lose their minds," Lena laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "They're getting divorced. I don't think they get to have opinions about our lives anymore." "Fair point. Besides, we're adults. We're allowed to make our own choices, even if those choices are complicated." "Complicated is an understatement." "Maybe, but Daniel—" She paused, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones in a gesture so tender it hurt. "I would rather have complicated with you than easy with anyone else." Before Daniel could respond, before he could process the enormity of what they were agreeing to, Emma's voice cut through the moment. "Daddy?" They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents, both turning toward the pull-out bed where Emma was sitting up, rubbing her eyes and looking confused by the darkness and the unfamiliar surroundings. "Hey, sweetheart." Daniel crossed to her quickly, settling onto the edge of the bed. "You okay?" "I'm cold, and I had a weird dream." Emma's eyes found Lena standing by the fireplace. "Why are you guys over there?" "We were adding wood to the fire," Lena said, her voice remarkably steady given the conversation they'd just been having. "The room got chilly." Emma considered this, then held out her arms toward Lena. "Can you come back? I was warmer when you were here." Something in Lena's expression crumbled at the simple request. She looked at Daniel, a question in her eyes, and he nodded. Whatever else they needed to figure out, whatever complications lay ahead, denying Emma warmth and comfort wasn't an option. Lena returned to the bed, and Emma immediately burrowed into her side with the unselfconscious trust of childhood. "You're really warm, Aunt Lena." "Thanks, Emma Bean. You're pretty warm yourself." Daniel climbed back under the blankets on Emma's other side, and within minutes they were arranged exactly as they had been before. Emma in the middle, Daniel and Lena flanking her, the fire burning steadier now, but the storm still raging outside. "Tell me a story," Emma said sleepily, already halfway back to unconsciousness. "What kind of story?" Lena asked. "One about when you and Daddy were young." The request was so innocent, so completely unaware of the minefield it represented, that Daniel almost laughed. Lena caught his eye over Emma's head, and he could see her struggling with the same impulse. "How about a different story?" Daniel suggested. "One about a brave princess." "Princesses are boring," Emma declared. "I want a real story, about real people." Lena's hand found Daniel's across Emma's sleeping form, their fingers intertwining in the darkness. "Okay," Lena said slowly. "I'll tell you about the first time I met your dad." Daniel's grip tightened in warning, but Lena's expression was calm, controlled, like she knew exactly what she was doing. "It was at a restaurant," Lena continued. "A fancy one with white tablecloths and candles on every table. I was nervous because I was meeting your Grandpa Michael for the first time, and I wanted to make a good impression." "Why were you nervous?" Emma asked, fighting sleep to hear the story. "Because meeting new people can be scary. You want them to like you, but you don't know if they will." Lena's voice was soft, almost hypnotic. "Anyway, I walked into the restaurant wearing my favorite blue dress, and the first person I saw was your dad." "What did he look like?" "Handsome," Lena said simply. "He was wearing a button-down shirt and jeans, and he had grease under his fingernails from working on cars all day. And when he smiled at me, I thought, this person is going to be important." Emma made a satisfied sound. "That's romantic." "It was," Lena agreed, "but also complicated. Because your dad and I couldn't be what we wanted to be. Not right away. We had to wait a very long time." "Why?" "Because sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices about what's right and what's fair. And your dad and I, we chose to wait, to be patient, to put other people's happiness first." Daniel watched Lena tell this version of their story, watched her find a way to make it both true and appropriate for a 6-year-old's understanding. She was better at this than he'd given her credit for, better at navigating the complexity of what they were to each other in a way that honored Emma's need for simple truths. "But you're friends now, right?" Emma asked, yawning. "You don't have to wait anymore?" Lena's eyes met Daniel's across the darkness. "We're working on it, Emma Bean. We're working on being better than friends." "Like family?" "Yeah, like family." That seemed to satisfy Emma, who snuggled deeper into the blankets and let her eyes drift closed. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out again, and she was asleep. The silence that followed felt different than before, heavier with possibility, lighter without pretense. Daniel and Lena lay in the darkness, hands still clasped across Emma's sleeping form, neither quite ready to let go of the connection. "That was risky," Daniel said quietly, telling her that story. "Was it? Or was it the first honest thing we've said to her about us in 7 years? She's 6. She doesn't need to know about—" Daniel gestured vaguely at the space between them. "I know, but she does need to know that we don't hate each other, that whatever coldness she's sensed between us isn't real." Lena's thumb traced patterns on the back of his hand. "Kids are perceptive, Daniel. I guarantee Emma has picked up on the tension at family gatherings. This way, she knows it wasn't about her. It was about us figuring ourselves out." "You're good with her?" "I've had a lot of practice wanting to be." "Was?" The storm outside had reached a howling crescendo, wind battering the cabin with enough force that the windows rattled in their frames. Snow was piling up against the glass, creating drifts that glowed white in the moonlight filtering through the clouds. "We're definitely not leaving in the morning," Daniel observed. "Good. We're not done talking yet. What else is there to talk about? We've established that we love each other, that we're tired of pretending, that we want to try making this work. What's left?" "The logistics," Lena said practically. "The actual details of how this works in real life. You live an hour away, you have a business, you have Emma. I have a job in the city, an apartment, a life that doesn't currently include you at all. So we date, like normal people. I drive to the city, you drive to me, we figure out schedules. And Emma? We tell her we're friends who are becoming closer. We let her get used to you being around more. We don't rush anything or make promises we can't keep." "What about our parents?" That was the harder question. Daniel thought about his father, about Margaret, about the divorce that was coming whether or not he and Lena admitted the truth about their relationship. "We tell them after the holidays, after they've told everyone about the separation. We're honest about what we want. They're going to think we're the reason they're splitting up. Let them think it. We know the truth. We stayed away specifically to protect their marriage, and it didn't matter. We can't control how they interpret our relationship." Lena was quiet for a long moment. "I'm scared they'll hate us for this." "They might. But Lena, we've spent 7 years putting their feelings ahead of ours. We've sacrificed our entire relationship to protect their marriage. At some point, we have to choose ourselves. Even if it hurts them? Even then. Because we can't save their marriage by destroying ourselves. We've already tried that, and look where it got us." The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the ceiling. Emma shifted between them, one small hand reaching out in sleep to grasp Daniel's shirt, anchoring herself to him the way she always did. It was her tell that she was deep asleep, completely relaxed, trusting that she was safe. "Tell me about Rachel," Lena said suddenly. Daniel hadn't expected that question. "What about her?" "Everything. What she was like, why it didn't work, how you handled it when she left." "Why do you want to know?" "Because she's Emma's mother. Because that's part of who you are, part of the life you built while we were pretending. Because if we're doing this for real, I need to understand all of it." Daniel sighed, trying to organize thoughts about a woman he'd worked hard not to think about for the last 5 years. "I met Rachel at a bar. I was 23, she was 22, and we were both kind of lost. She was pretty and funny, and I was lonely and tired of being alone. We dated for 6 months, and I thought I loved her." "Did you?" "I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of her more than the actual person. I loved the distraction she provided from thinking about you. I loved the normalcy of having a girlfriend who didn't come with impossible complications. And then she got pregnant. And then she got pregnant. It wasn't planned, obviously. We'd been careful, but nothing's foolproof. When she told me, I did what I thought was the right thing. I proposed. We got married at the courthouse with my dad and Margaret as witnesses. Lena's hand tightened in his. Was I invited? No. We kept it small specifically so we wouldn't have to… Daniel stopped. So I wouldn't have to watch you watch me marry someone else. That was probably wise. Rachel tried. For the first few months after Emma was born, she really tried. But I think she realized pretty quickly that she'd made a mistake, that she didn't want to be a wife or a mother, that she'd gotten caught up in the moment and made choices she couldn't sustain. What happened? She left, walked out when Emma was 11 months old, said she needed to find herself, that she'd suffocate if she stayed. I was furious at first, then devastated, then resigned. Daniel looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully between them. But ultimately, I think she did us both a favor. Better to leave early than stay and resent us for the next 18 years. Does she have any contact with Emma? Birthday cards? Sometimes Christmas? She sends money occasionally, but she's never asked for visitation, never tried to be part of Emma's actual life. Daniel paused. I used to be angry about that. Now I think Emma's better off. She has me, she has my dad and Margaret, she has stability and love and everything she needs. Rachel would just complicate that. And now she'd have me too, Lena said softly. If you let her. If you want that, if this works out the way we're hoping it will. I want that, Lena said with such fierce certainty that Daniel's chest tightened. I've wanted that since the first time I met her at that birthday party 3 years ago. I've wanted to be part of her life in a real way, not just the aunt who shows up twice a year. You're already part of her life, Lena. She loves you. But I want more. I want school pickups and homework help and bedtime stories. I want to know her friends' names and her favorite foods and what she's afraid of. I want to be someone she counts on, someone she knows will always be there. Daniel pulled their joined hands up to press against his chest, letting Lena feel the hammering of his heart. That's what I'm offering. That's what this is, if we make it work. Not just you and me figuring out a relationship, but building an actual family, the three of us. What if I mess it up? What if I'm terrible at it? You won't be. I've watched you with her, Lena. You're already better at this than you think. Tears slipped down Lena's face, catching the firelight. I'm terrified I'm going to wake up tomorrow, and this will all feel like a mistake. That we'll go back to the cabin in daylight and remember all the reasons we made our original agreement. We won't. How can you be so sure? Because I've spent 7 years waiting to have this conversation with you. 7 years building toward this moment. And now that we're here, now that we've finally said everything we've been holding back, there's no going backwards, even if we wanted to. The storm outside began to ease slightly, the wind dying down to a manageable howl, the snow falling more gently against the windows. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and steady, casting the three of them in a cocoon of light and heat. When did you know you wanted kids? Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't, really. Not until Emma existed, and suddenly I couldn't imagine my life without her. Do you want more? Other children? The question hung between them, weighted with implication. I don't know. I never let myself think that far ahead. It was hard enough getting through each day with Emma. The idea of more kids, a bigger family, it felt impossible without… He stopped. Without me, Lena finished. Yeah. I want kids, Lena said. I've always wanted them. But I told myself it was never going to happen because the only person I could imagine having them with was you, and that wasn't an option. It is now. Is it really? Or are we getting caught up in the moment and finally admitting feelings we've suppressed for years without thinking through what any of this actually means? Daniel turned on his side, careful not to disturb Emma, so he could see Lena's face more clearly. What are you asking? I'm asking if you're sure. If this is really what you want, or if you're just lonely and I'm convenient because I'm already here, already part of the family, already someone Emma knows. Lena? Because I need to know, Daniel. I need to know this is real before I let myself believe it, before I start planning a future that might not exist. Daniel reached across Emma to cup Lena's face, his palm warm against her cheek. Listen to me. I have been in love with you for 8 years. Through a marriage that didn't work, through raising a child alone, through building a business and a life that was supposed to help me get over you. None of it worked. None of it touched what I feel for you. But I'm not done. You are not convenient. You are not second choice. You are not the easy option because Rachel left and I'm lonely. You are the person I have wanted every single day for nearly a decade. You are the person I think about when Emma does something amazing and I wish I had someone to share it with. You are the person I compare everyone else to and find them lacking. Lena's eyes were streaming now, her breath coming in shaky gasps. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true. Because it makes me hope. And hope is dangerous when we've spent so long protecting ourselves from it. Daniel leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching Lena's across the small space Emma's sleeping form created. Then be dangerous with me. Stop protecting yourself. Stop assuming this won't work before we've even tried. What if we hurt each other? We probably will. People who love each other usually do, eventually. But Lena, I would rather hurt with you than be safe without you. She closed her eyes, fresh tears escaping to trail down her temples. I'm so tired of being careful. Then stop. Be reckless. Choose this even though it's scary. I already did. The moment I told you I loved you, I chose this. Then trust it. Trust us. Lena opened her eyes, and in the firelight they looked almost gold, fierce, and vulnerable at once. Okay. Okay? Okay. I'm trusting this. I'm trusting us. I'm choosing to believe that 7 years of waiting wasn't for nothing. Daniel felt something enormous shift in his chest, some final defense crumbling under the weight of her words. Come here. I can't. Emma's between us. Then I'll come to you. He shifted carefully, maneuvering around Emma's sleeping form until he was close enough to pull Lena into his arms properly. She came willingly, burying her face against his shoulder, her body shaking with the force of everything they'd finally allowed themselves to feel. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other across the landscape of Emma's sleeping form, the fire burning low again, the storm finally beginning to ease outside. And somewhere in the darkness, in the space between what they'd been and what they were becoming, 7 years of careful distance collapsed into this single moment of impossible, terrifying, perfect truth. Tomorrow would bring complications. Their parents would need to be told. Logistics would need to be figured out. Emma would need careful navigation through whatever changes came next. But tonight, in this cabin, with the storm sealing them away from the real world, Daniel and Lena finally let themselves exist in the truth they'd denied for so long. And it felt like coming home. Morning came too quickly and not fast enough. Daniel woke to weak winter sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows and the sound of Emma's excited voice cutting through the quiet cabin. Daddy! Daddy, wake up! Look how much snow there is! He opened his eyes to find his daughter kneeling on the bed beside him, her face pressed against the cold glass, breath fogging the window as she pointed at the transformed landscape outside. The storm had dumped what looked like 2 feet of snow overnight, burying the cars, reshaping the trees into white sculptures, turning the world into something unrecognizable. Lena was already awake on Emma's other side, her hair tangled from sleep, wearing the same clothes she'd slept in, looking more beautiful than anyone had a right to look at 7 in the morning. Their eyes met over Emma's bobbing head, and something electric passed between them, acknowledgement of everything that had been said in the darkness, everything that had changed. Can we go sledding now, please? Emma bounced on the mattress with enough force to make both adults wince. After breakfast, Daniel said, his voice rough from sleep and emotion and too many hours spent talking instead of resting. And after we check with Grandma and Grandpa about what the plan is. There's so much snow. We're definitely stuck here, right? We get to stay longer? Lena smiled at Emma's enthusiasm, reaching out to smooth down the child's sleep-wild hair. Looks that way, Emma Bean. Might be stuck here for a while. The way she said it, the subtle weight behind the words, told Daniel she wasn't just talking about the weather. They were stuck here with the truth they'd finally spoken, stuck with the decision they'd made, stuck with having to navigate the aftermath together. Emma scrambled off the bed and ran toward the hallway, presumably to find her grandparents and share her excitement about the snow. The moment she was gone, the air in the room shifted, became charged with awareness and uncertainty. "Did last night actually happen?" Lena asked quietly, not quite meeting Daniel's eyes. "Or did I dream the entire thing?" "It happened." "And you meant it? Everything you said?" Daniel sat up, pushing blankets aside, and reached for her hand. She let him take it, their fingers intertwining with a familiarity that felt both new and ancient. "Every word. Did you?" "Yes." The answer was immediate, certain. "I'm terrified, but yes." "Good. Me too." They sat there for a moment in the rumpled bed, holding hands like teenagers, both aware that at some point they'd have to leave this room and face Michael and Margaret and the complicated reality of what they were choosing. But for now, for just a few more seconds, they could exist in this bubble where nothing mattered except the simple fact of finally being honest. "We should talk about how we handle today," Lena said, ever practical. "Your dad and my mom are going to notice if we suddenly stop being cold to each other. So we don't stop. Not yet. Not until we've figured out how to tell them. You want to keep pretending? Just for a few more days. Until the storm clears, until we're back in our regular lives and can have actual conversations instead of dropping this bomb while we're all trapped in a cabin together." Lena considered this, then nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Give them time to process their own separation before we add our relationship to the mix." "Exactly. But Daniel," she squeezed his hand, "I don't know if I can go back to being cold to you, not after last night, not after everything we said. We don't have to be cold. We can be civil, polite. Two adults who are learning to tolerate each other for the sake of family harmony. That's still lying. It's strategic honesty. We're protecting them until the time is right to tell the full truth." Lena's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're good at rationalizing." "I've had 7 years of practice." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them spring apart, both suddenly aware of how it would look if someone walked in and found them holding hands on the bed they'd shared. Margaret appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day, her expression concerned. "The roads are completely impassable," she said without preamble. "I just got off the phone with the rental company. They're saying it could be 2 or 3 days before plows make it up here." 3 days? Daniel's stomach sank even as part of him recognized the dark irony. They'd spent 7 years avoiding extended time together, and now the universe was forcing them into close quarters for 72 more hours. "I'm so sorry," Margaret continued, genuine distress in her voice. "I know this wasn't what any of you signed up for. Being trapped here with—" She gestured vaguely between Daniel and Lena. "Well, with the tension between you two." "We'll manage," Lena said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's not ideal, but we're adults. We can handle a few days." Margaret looked between them, something uncertain flickering across her expression. "You know, I've always hoped that eventually you two would at least become friends. You're both such good people. It seems like such a waste that you can't get along." The words landed with unintentional weight. Daniel felt Lena's hand twitch where it rested on the bed between them, hidden from Margaret's view. Friends. If Margaret only knew how far past friendship they'd traveled in the darkness last night. "Maybe this is an opportunity," Margaret said, warming to the idea. 3 days together, nowhere to escape. Maybe you'll finally figure out how to be in the same room without all the coldness." "Maybe," Daniel said non-committally. After Margaret left to check on breakfast preparations, Lena turned to Daniel with wide eyes. "She's going to push us together, isn't she? Think this is some kind of bonding opportunity?" "Probably." "This is going to be exhausting. Welcome to the next 3 days of our lives." They separated to get ready for the day, Daniel helping Emma pick out warm clothes for sledding while Lena disappeared into the bathroom. The cabin's morning routine felt surreal, moving through these domestic motions while carrying the weight of last night's confessions, trying to act normal when everything had fundamentally shifted. Breakfast was pancakes and bacon, the kitchen filled with the sounds of sizzling and Margaret's cheerful narration of the storm damage she could see from the windows. Michael sat at the table with coffee and the crossword puzzle from a newspaper that was already 2 days old, looking more tired than Daniel remembered seeing him. The divorce news had clearly taken its toll. Emma chattered about sledding plans, barely pausing to breathe between bites of syrup-soaked pancake. Lena sat across from Daniel again, and this time when their eyes met, there was no careful neutrality. There was heat and promise and barely concealed want that made Daniel shift uncomfortably in his chair. "So what's everyone's plan for today?" Margaret asked, playing hostess even in a rented cabin during a snowstorm. "Obviously, we're limited in options, but we could play games, watch movies, maybe build a snowman with Emma." "Sledding," Emma said immediately. "You promised, Daddy." "I said after breakfast, and I'm still eating." "You're slow eating." Lena laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded, and Daniel watched Margaret's expression shift to surprise. It was probably the first time she'd heard Lena laugh at something he'd said, or something related to him, in 7 years. "I'll take her sledding," Lena offered. "If that's okay with you, Daniel, give you a chance to help your dad look at that heating system again." It was a peace offering disguised as practicality, and Margaret's face lit up like Lena had offered her the moon. "That's so sweet of you, honey. Are you sure? I love sledding, and Emma's great company." Lena directed the comment at Emma, not Daniel, but the warmth in her voice carried across the table anyway. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" Daniel could hardly refuse without looking like the difficult one. "Sure, but stay where we can see you from the window. And Emma, you listen to Aunt Lena about safety, okay?" "I will!" An hour later, Daniel stood at the kitchen window watching Lena and Emma trudge through knee-deep snow toward a promising hill visible from the cabin. Emma's bright pink jacket was a splash of color against the white landscape, and Lena's careful attention to his daughter, the way she held Emma's hand, the way she checked the sled, the way she clearly explained something that made Emma nod seriously, made Daniel's chest ache. "She's good with her," Michael said, appearing at Daniel's shoulder with fresh coffee. "Lena, with Emma." "Yeah, she is. I always thought it was a shame you two never got along. Lena's a wonderful person, kind, responsible, smart. She would have made a good friend to you." Daniel gripped his coffee mug harder than necessary. "Dad, I know, can't force these things. Some people just don't mesh, no matter how much everyone else wishes they would." Michael paused, watching Lena help Emma position herself on the sled. "Margaret used to think it was something we did wrong, that we rushed the marriage, didn't give you two enough time to adjust before making you siblings." "You didn't do anything wrong." "Didn't we?" Michael's voice carried an unexpected edge of bitterness. "Because from where I'm standing, we built this family on sand. Margaret and I wanted so badly to make it work, to prove that second marriages could be successful, that blended families could be happy. We ignored all the cracks." Daniel turned to look at his father properly. Michael looked older than his 56 years in the harsh morning light, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth, his shoulders carrying visible weight. Margaret told Lena about the separation. "I figured she might," Michael sighed. "We're planning to announce it after New Year's, didn't want to ruin everyone's holidays with our failure." "It's not a failure, Dad. Sometimes things just don't work out." "Easy to say when you're not the one admitting defeat." Michael took a long drink of coffee, his eyes still fixed on the window where Lena was now pulling Emma back up the hill for another run. 7 years, Daniel. We made it 7 years. That should count for something." "Does count. You tried. Both of you tried." Not hard enough, apparently. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Outside, Emma squealed with delight as she flew down the hill, Lena running alongside to catch her at the bottom. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so achingly normal, that Daniel felt the weight of his own deception pressing down on his shoulders. His father was standing here mourning a failed marriage, and Daniel was keeping secrets about his relationship with Margaret's daughter, secrets that would come out eventually, that would potentially make everything worse. "Dad," Daniel started, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "What? Do you regret it? Marrying Margaret, trying to build this family, all of it?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "No, I don't regret trying. I regret that it didn't work, but I don't regret the attempt. Margaret's a good woman. She deserves happiness, and I hope she finds it, just not with me." "What happened? You seemed happy." "We were, for a while. But we wanted different things, Daniel. She wants roots, community, to stay in one place and build connections. I want freedom, adventure, to see the world before I'm too old to enjoy it. He smiled sadly. Turns out those aren't compatible goals. You could compromise. We tried. For years we tried. But compromise just meant both of us were unhappy instead of one of us. Eventually you realize that's not sustainable. Outside, Lena was teaching Emma how to steer the sled, both of them laughing when Emma deliberately crashed into a snowbank. The sound of their joy drifted through the window, incongruous against the heaviness of the conversation happening inside. Can I ask you something? Daniel said carefully. Of course. If you'd known it would end like this, if you'd known 7 years ago that you and Margaret weren't going to make it, would you still have gotten married? Michael considered the question seriously. Probably not. Which sounds terrible, I know. But if I'd known the outcome, I would have saved us both a lot of pain and just stayed friends with her. Sometimes the trying isn't worth the inevitable heartbreak. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Sometimes the trying isn't worth the inevitable heartbreak. Was that what he and Lena were setting themselves up for? 7 years of sacrifice followed by an attempt that might end in the same place as Michael and Margaret? Why do you ask? Michael's gaze sharpened with parental perception. You thinking about dating again? No, just wondering. Emma would probably like it if you did, having a mother figure around. Daniel thought about Lena pulling Emma up the hill again, patient and attentive and everything a mother should be. Maybe someday. Don't wait too long. You're 30 years old, Daniel. You've got a lot of life ahead of you. Don't waste it being alone out of fear. The irony was suffocating. Here was his father, telling him not to waste his life, while Daniel stood at the window watching the woman he loved play with his daughter and couldn't even admit the truth about what he wanted. Outside, Emma took another run down the hill, this time on her stomach, shrieking with delight. Lena stood at the bottom with her arms out, ready to catch her, and Daniel watched as his daughter crashed into Lena's legs, and they both tumbled into the snow, laughing. The image seared itself into his memory. This was what he wanted. Not someday, not in some theoretical future, but now. He wanted Lena in his life, in Emma's life, as more than the aunt who visited twice a year. He wanted mornings like this to be normal instead of stolen moments during a snowstorm. But his father's words echoed in his head. Sometimes the trying isn't worth the inevitable heartbreak. What if he and Lena tried and failed? What if they ended up like Michael and Margaret, 7 years down the road realizing they'd made a mistake? Except it wouldn't just be the two of them hurting, it would be Emma too, losing someone she'd grown to love. I should go check that heating unit again, Daniel said abruptly, needing to escape his own spiraling thoughts. Michael nodded, still watching out the window. I'll be here if you need help. The heating closet was cold and cramped, but at least it gave Daniel something concrete to focus on. He pulled out the toolbox he'd found earlier, examining the furnace with more attention than it probably required. The thermocouple was indeed faulty, and while he could jury-rig a temporary fix, it wouldn't last long. Much like everything else in this cabin, apparently. He was elbow-deep in the furnace mechanism when he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to look to know it was Lena. He'd become attuned to the sound of her presence over the years, could feel her in a room before he saw her. Emma wanted hot chocolate, Lena said quietly. I left her with my mom. How was sledding? Cold. Fun. She's got good instincts for steering, actually. Fearless, too. Reminds me of you when you were younger. Daniel glanced back at her. You didn't know me when I was younger. Your dad showed me pictures once. You at 8 or 9, building a treehouse with your grandfather. No harness, no safety gear, just balanced on a branch 20 feet up with a hammer and a huge smile. I broke my arm falling out of that treehouse 2 weeks later. See? Fearless. And apparently not great at learning from experience, since you're trying to fix a furnace without proper tools. I'm managing. Lena moved closer, crouching beside him to peer at the furnace. She smelled like cold air and snow, and something floral he couldn't place. Your dad and my mom are in the living room having what looks like a serious conversation. Thought you should know. He told me they're announcing the divorce after New Year's. Yeah, Mom told me the same thing. Lena's shoulder brushed his as she shifted position. Feels like the end of an era. Feels like we gave up 7 years for nothing. Not nothing. They had 7 years. We had, she paused. We had whatever last night was. The beginning of something, maybe. Daniel set down the wrench he'd been holding and turned to face her fully. In the cramped space of the closet, they were close enough that he could count the freckles on her nose, see the exact shade of brown in her eyes. Are you having second thoughts? Are you? I asked first. Lena reached out, her hand hovering near his face before finally making contact, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I'm terrified. Does that count as second thoughts? I don't know. I'm terrified too. Of what? Of this not working, of hurting Emma, of ending up like our parents, realizing 7 years from now that we made a mistake. Daniel caught her hand, held it against his face. My dad just told me that if he'd known how it would end, he wouldn't have tried at all. That sometimes trying isn't worth the heartbreak. Lena's expression shifted, something hurt flickering across it. And you think that applies to us? I think I don't know how to protect Emma if this falls apart. So what are you saying? That we should stop before we start? That last night was a mistake? No, I'm saying I'm scared and I don't know what the right choice is anymore. They stayed frozen like that, her hand trapped against his face, both of them breathing too fast in the small space. Outside the closet, they could hear Margaret moving around the kitchen, could hear Emma's distant laughter from somewhere in the cabin. My mom asked me this morning if you and I had actually talked, Lena said quietly. Said she noticed we both seemed different today. Less hostile. What did you tell her? That we were trying, that being stuck here was forcing us to be civil. Lena's thumb brushed across his cheekbone. But Daniel, I don't want to just be civil with you. I don't want to spend 3 more days pretending when we finally stopped pretending last night. We agreed to wait, to tell them after the holidays. I know what we agreed. I'm just saying it's going to be harder than I thought. Everything about this is harder than we thought. Lena leaned in closer, her forehead nearly touching his, her breath warm on his face. Are you backing out? Because if you are, tell me now. Don't let me hope if you're already looking for the exit. I'm not looking for an exit. Then what are you doing? I'm trying to figure out how to do this right. How to protect everyone while still choosing what I want. You can't protect everyone, Daniel. Someone's going to get hurt no matter what we do. The question is whether we hurt ourselves by denying this, or we risk hurting other people by pursuing it. The truth of her words settled in his chest like a stone. She was right. There was no path forward that didn't involve pain for someone. They could sacrifice themselves again, go back to being distant and cold, protect their parents and Emma from any potential fallout. Or they could choose each other and accept that the consequences might be messy. I choose you, Daniel said, the words coming out rough but certain. I'm scared and I don't know if this is the right call, but I choose you anyway. Lena's eyes filled with tears. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. She kissed him then, right there in the cramped heating closet, with his father in the next room and Emma somewhere in the cabin, and 7 years of denial finally crumbling into this single moment of reckless honesty. Her lips were cold from being outside, but her mouth was warm, and Daniel felt something in his chest crack open at the simple reality of finally, after so long, getting to touch her like this. It lasted maybe 5 seconds before they both pulled back, aware of how dangerous this was, how easily they could be caught. But those 5 seconds rewrote Daniel's entire understanding of possibility. Okay, Lena breathed, her pupils blown wide, her hand still cupping his face. Okay, we're doing this. Yeah, we are. But we should probably not do that again until we've actually told people, because I don't think I can stop if we start. Daniel laughed, the sound startled out of him by the combination of desire and absurdity. Agreed. They separated reluctantly, both hyper-aware of how they must look, flushed, disheveled, obvious. Lena smoothed down her hair while Daniel turned back to the furnace, trying to calm his racing heart. I should get back to Emma, Lena said, before my mom wonders what's taking so long. Yeah, go. She paused in the doorway. Daniel? Yeah? Thank you for choosing this, for choosing me. Then she was gone, and Daniel was alone with a broken furnace and the echoing memory of her kiss and the terrifying certainty that he'd just committed to something that could either save him or destroy everything. The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended reality. Daniel fixed the furnace well enough to get lukewarm air circulating through the vents. Margaret made lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food that matched the cozy cabin atmosphere. Emma alternated between playing in the snow and warming up by the fire, her energy seemingly endless despite the cold. And through it all, Daniel and Lena orbited each other carefully, maintaining the appearance of polite distance while trading loaded glances across rooms, finding excuses to stand near each other, existing in a state of hyper-awareness that felt both exhilarating and exhausting. Margaret noticed. Daniel could see her watching them with poorly concealed hope, clearly thinking her plan to force them together was working. Michael seemed oblivious, wrapped up in his own thoughts about the impending divorce announcement. By evening, the cabin had settled into quiet domesticity. Emma had crashed early, worn out from hours of sledding and playing in the snow. Margaret and Michael had retreated to their room, their low voices carrying through the walls in what sounded like difficult conversation, which left Daniel and Lena alone in the main room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the fire crackling between them and the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like physical force. "This is torture," Lena said finally, breaking the silence. "What is?" "Being this close to you and having to pretend we're barely tolerating each other. Watching you all day and not being able to touch you. Wanting to kiss you again and knowing I can't." Daniel's hands tightened on his knees. "Lena, I know we agreed to wait. I'm just saying it's harder than I expected. 3 more days until the snow clears. Then we go back to our regular lives and figure out how to actually do this. And in the meantime, we're careful. We don't give anything away before we're ready to deal with the consequences." Lena pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "What if we can't do this? What if wanting each other isn't enough to overcome all the logistics and complications? Then we figure that out when we get there. You're being awfully calm about this." "One of us has to be." She laughed softly. "Fair point." A pause, then, "Tell me something." "What?" "Something I don't know about you. Something real. We've spent 7 years avoiding each other, and I realize today that I don't actually know that much about your life. Your real life, not just the surface stuff everyone sees." Daniel thought about it. "I hate working on cars." Lena's eyebrows shot up. "What?" "I'm good at it. I inherited the business from my grandfather, and I've made it successful, but I don't actually enjoy it. It's just what I know how to do." "Then why do you do it?" "Because it pays the bills, because it's stable. Because when Emma came along, I needed something reliable, and the garage was there." He paused. "And because it was a good excuse to stay busy. Too busy for relationships, too busy for family gatherings, too busy to think about you." Lena absorbed this information. "So what would you do? If you could do anything?" "I don't know. I've never let myself think about it. Think about it now." Daniel leaned his head back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. "Maybe teaching. I used to help kids in the neighborhood work on their cars, teach them basic maintenance. I liked that, seeing them get excited when they figured something out." "You'd be good at that." "It doesn't pay like owning a garage does." "Maybe not, but you'd be happy." The word landed between them, heavy with implication. Happy. Such a simple concept, and yet Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd applied it to himself. Content, maybe. Functional. Getting through each day. But happy? "What about you?" Daniel asked. "You happy working in marketing?" Lena shrugged. "It's fine. Pays well. Good benefits. I'm good at it." "That's not an answer." "No," she admitted. "I'm not happy. I thought I would be. I worked hard to get where I am, climbed the ladder, made all the right career moves. But at the end of the day, I go home to an empty apartment and wonder what I'm working for." "You could change careers, you're 31. That's not too old to start over." "And do what?" "I don't know." "What did you want to be when you were younger, before you decided on marketing?" Lena was quiet for a long moment. "A teacher, elementary school, maybe kindergarten. I wanted to work with kids." The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with everything it implied. She'd wanted to work with children, but instead she'd built a career that took her further from that dream. She'd wanted a family, but she'd convinced herself that work was enough. Just like Daniel had convinced himself that raising Emma alone was enough, that building a successful business was a substitute for building a life. They'd both been lying to themselves for years. "We're kind of a mess, aren't we?" Lena said, echoing his thoughts. "Yeah, we are." "Do you think we can fix it?" "I think we can try." The fire popped loudly, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the world was silent under its blanket of snow. Inside, two people who'd spent 7 years denying themselves were finally starting to imagine what truth might look like. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said. "Why did you agree that night? When I said we couldn't be together, that we had to protect our parents' marriage, you just agreed. You didn't fight me on it." Daniel had known this question would come eventually. "Because I thought you were right. Our parents were happy, and we were young, and I genuinely thought, that doing the right thing meant sacrificing what I wanted. And now? Now I think I was an idiot. Now I think we both were. We were trying to be good people. We were trying to be martyrs. There's a difference." Lena uncurled from her protective position, stretching her legs out until her foot brushed against Daniel's thigh. The contact was probably accidental, but neither of them moved to break it. "My mom is going to be devastated when we tell her. My dad is going to think we caused the divorce." "We didn't. They caused their own divorce by wanting different things." "I know that, but I don't think he will." The weight of what they were walking into settled over them both. Telling their parents wouldn't just be admitting to hidden feelings, it would be revealing 7 years of deception, of carefully maintained hostility that was never real. It would be forcing Michael and Margaret to re-examine every family gathering, every cold interaction, every moment they'd blamed themselves for not bringing their children together. It was going to hurt people they loved. "Is it worth it?" Lena asked, her voice small. "All the pain we're going to cause, all the damage to our relationships with our parents. Is what we have worth all that?" Daniel looked at her across the couch, at the woman who'd sent birthday cards to his daughter for years, who'd built a life she didn't love because she thought happiness was impossible, who'd chosen to protect other people's feelings over her own for so long that she'd forgotten what wanting felt like. "Yes," he said with absolute certainty. "You're worth it." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks, catching the firelight. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've spent 7 years trying to convince myself you weren't, and it never worked. Not for a single day." She moved then, closing the distance between them on the couch, curling into his side like she belonged there. Daniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, and they sat like that in the firelight while the cabin creaked around them and the snow fell outside and the future loomed uncertain, but finally, impossibly, theirs to shape. 3 more days, Lena murmured against his shoulder. 3 more days of pretending. And then? And then we tell the truth, all of it, and deal with whatever comes after. I'm scared. Me too. But you really think we can do this? Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head, a gesture of promise and comfort, and 7 years of longing finally finding expression. I think we already are. They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the cold crept in and the sound of footsteps in the hallway forced them apart. But for those stolen minutes, wrapped in each other's arms with nothing but truth between them, Daniel finally understood what his father had meant about trying being worth it. Sometimes the heartbreak was inevitable, but sometimes the trying was everything. Daniel filed away that piece of information, another moment he'd missed, another connection between Lena and Emma that had been happening under his nose while he'd been maintaining careful distance. Would you be okay if Aunt Lena and I became friends? Daniel asked carefully. Like actual friends who spent time together? Emma's expression brightened. Really? You're going to stop being weird around each other? We're going to try. Yes, finally! Emma threw her arms around Daniel's neck. I've been asking Grandma for years why you guys don't like each other. She always said it was complicated, but I think you'll be good friends. The simplicity of her acceptance made Daniel's eyes sting. While the adults had been tying themselves in knots over propriety and family dynamics, Emma had just wanted the people she loved to love each other. You're pretty smart, you know that, Daniel said. I know. Can I go wake up Aunt Lena and tell her you're going to be friends now? How about we let her sleep a little longer? We can tell her at breakfast. Emma agreed reluctantly, and they got dressed for the day. When they emerged into the main cabin area, Margaret was already up, making coffee, and looking like she'd slept about as well as Daniel had. "Morning," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," Daniel lied. Emma's excited because she thinks she's going to get to build another snowman today. It's still pretty cold out there, but I think the snow has finally stopped. Margaret poured coffee into 2 mugs, sliding one across the counter to Daniel. "Michael is checking the weather report. Might be able to get plows up here by tomorrow." Tomorrow, which meant today was the day they needed to have the conversation. The knot in Daniel's stomach tightened. Lena emerged from her room looking as exhausted as Daniel felt. Her eyes met his across the kitchen, a whole conversation happening in that glance. Today. We're doing this today. "Morning," Lena said to the room at large, accepting coffee from her mother gratefully. "Morning, Aunt Lena." Emma bounded over. "Daddy says you're going to be friends now, real friends, not just pretend polite friends." The room went very still. Margaret's eyes widened. Lena froze with her coffee mug halfway to her mouth. Daniel resisted the urge to laugh at the absurdity of Emma casually detonating their carefully planned revelation. "Emma," Daniel said carefully, "I said we'd tell everyone at breakfast." "It is breakfast. I had cereal." Emma looked between the adults, clearly confused by the sudden tension. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. You didn't say anything wrong." Daniel took a breath, meeting Margaret's confused gaze. "We were actually planning to have a family conversation today. About me and Lena." Margaret set down her coffee mug with exaggerated care. "What kind of conversation?" "The kind that requires everyone present. Is Dad up?" "I'm here." Michael appeared from the hallway, looking between all of them with mounting concern. "What's going on?" This wasn't how Daniel had imagined this conversation starting. He'd pictured sitting everyone down after breakfast, in the living room maybe, with time to prepare and script what he wanted to say. Instead, he was standing in the kitchen in pajama pants with his daughter bouncing excitedly and his father looking suspicious and Margaret looking like she was bracing for another blow. But maybe this was better. Maybe scripted speeches would have felt rehearsed, artificial. Maybe the truth needed to come out messy and imperfect and human. "Emma, honey, can you go play in your room for a few minutes?" Daniel said. "The grown-ups need to talk." "But I want to hear about you and Aunt Lena being friends." "You will, I promise. Just give us a few minutes first, okay?" Emma grumbled, but complied, grabbing her book and retreating to the bedroom. The moment she was gone, the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Daniel," Michael said slowly, "what is this about?" Daniel looked at Lena. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, her hand gripping her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles were white. Together. They were doing this together. "Lena and I haven't been honest with you," Daniel started. "About our relationship, about how we actually feel about each other. We've been lying for 7 years, and it's time we told you the truth." Margaret's face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we don't hate each other. We've never hated each other. The distance, the coldness, all of it. It was deliberate. We chose that. We performed it." "Why?" The question came from Michael, his voice sharp. "Why would you pretend to hate each other?" "Because we thought it was the right thing to do," Lena said quietly, finally finding her voice. "Because we were trying to protect you. Both of you." "Protect us from what?" Margaret demanded. Daniel and Lena exchanged another glance. This was it. The moment of truth, irreversible and terrifying. "From knowing that we were in love," Daniel said simply. "From knowing that we've been in love since before you got married. From knowing that staying apart for 7 years has been the hardest thing either of us has ever done." The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the tile floor in an explosion of ceramic and hot liquid. No one moved to clean it up. "You're..." Margaret's voice failed her. She tried again. "You're in love with each other. You've been in love for 7 years and you never..." We never said anything because we didn't want to hurt you, Lena said, tears already streaming down her face. We didn't want to complicate your marriage. We thought if we just stayed away from each other, if we pretended there was nothing between us, that you and Michael could be happy. Michael's face had gone from pale to red. You've been lying to us for 7 years, performing some kind of, what? Elaborate theater production to convince us you couldn't stand each other? Yes, Daniel said simply. That's exactly what we did. Why? The word came out like an accusation from Margaret. Why would you do that to yourselves? Why would you do that to us? Because 3 months after you got married, we realized we had feelings for each other, Lena said. And we knew that if we acted on those feelings, it would destroy what you were building. You were so happy together. You were getting a second chance at love. How could we take that away from you? So instead, you took it away from yourselves? Margaret's voice climbed higher. You sacrificed 7 years of your lives for a marriage that was already failing? We didn't know it was failing, Daniel said. We just knew that telling you the truth would hurt you, and we couldn't do that. Michael's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Let me make sure I understand this. You two have been in love since you were 19 and 18 years old. You made some kind of pact to stay apart, and for 7 years you've been pretending to barely tolerate each other so that Margaret and I wouldn't feel guilty about our own relationship. Yes, Lena whispered. That's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. Michael's voice was sharp enough to cut. Do you have any idea how much damage you've done? How many family gatherings were ruined because we thought you hated each other? How much Margaret has blamed herself for not being able to bring her daughter and stepson together? We know, Daniel said. We know, and we're sorry, but nothing. You don't get to apologize your way out of 7 years of deception. Michael turned to Margaret. Did you know about this? Of course I didn't know. Margaret's voice broke completely. I've spent 7 years trying to fix a problem that didn't exist. 7 years apologizing to my daughter for putting her in a difficult family situation. 7 years watching her be cold to her stepbrother and thinking it was my fault. Mom, Lena reached for her mother, but Margaret stepped back, shaking her head. Just don't right now. Margaret pressed her hands against her eyes. I need a minute to process this. I need to understand what you're telling me. The kitchen had become a minefield of broken ceramic and spilled coffee, and 7 years of carefully constructed lies falling apart. Daniel wanted to fix it, wanted to find words that would make this better, but everything he could think to say felt inadequate against the enormity of what they'd done. You want to understand? Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. I'll help you understand. Our children, because that's what you are, whether you like it or not. Our children decided that their feelings mattered less than our happiness. They decided to sacrifice their own lives to protect a marriage that, as it turns out, they couldn't protect anyway. That's not fair, Lena said. We didn't know you were going to separate. You thought what? That your sacrifice would magically make our marriage perfect? That staying away from each other would somehow stabilize a relationship that had its own problems? Michael shook his head in disgust. You were arrogant and naive, both of you. And now you're standing here expecting us to what? Thank you for lying to us for 7 years? Congratulate you on finally admitting the truth? We're not expecting anything, Daniel said, forcing himself to stay calm even as his father's anger hammered at him. We're just telling you the truth, finally, because we can't keep lying, not to you and not to ourselves. How noble! The sarcasm in Michael's voice was withering. And what exactly do you want to happen now? You want our blessing, our permission to pursue this relationship? We don't need your permission, Lena said quietly. We're adults. We make our own choices. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been letting us make your choices for 7 years. Margaret's voice had gone cold, flat in a way that was somehow worse than anger. You let Michael and me dictate your entire lives. You let our happiness matter more than your own, and now you expect to just flip a switch and have everything be fine? We don't expect anything to be fine, Daniel said. We know we hurt you. We know this is a betrayal, but we can't keep pretending anymore, and we needed you to know the truth. The truth, Michael repeated bitterly. The truth is that I don't even know who you are anymore, Daniel. The son I raised wouldn't have been capable of this kind of sustained deception. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd expected anger, expected hurt, but the disappointment in his father's voice cut deeper than he'd anticipated. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, hearing how inadequate the words were. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. We both are." "Sorry doesn't give me back 7 years of family gatherings where I was comfortable," Margaret said. "Sorry doesn't erase the guilt I've been carrying for failing to bring you two together. Sorry doesn't make any of this okay." Lena was openly crying now, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. I know it doesn't, but what else can we say? What else can we do except tell you the truth and hope that eventually you'll understand why we made the choices we made?" "I will never understand," Margaret said flatly. "I will never understand how two people who claim to love each other could waste 7 years of their lives on a lie." "We were trying to protect you," Lena said desperately. "We were trying to do the right thing." "By lying? By performing this elaborate charade?" "That's not protection, Lena. That's manipulation. That's treating us like we were too fragile to handle the truth." "You were happy," Daniel said. "Both of you were happy, and we didn't want to take that away from you. So you took it away from yourselves instead." Michael's laugh was harsh. "Do you understand how insulting that is? How condescending? You decided that your feelings were more expendable than ours. You decided that you knew better than we did what we could handle." The truth of that accusation settled over the kitchen like ash. They had been condescending, Daniel realized. They'd treated their parents like children who needed to be protected from difficult truths. They'd made themselves martyrs without ever asking if the sacrifice was necessary. "You're right," Daniel said quietly. "We should have told you from the beginning. We should have been honest about our feelings and let you decide how to respond. We robbed you of that choice, and that was wrong." "Yes, it was wrong," Margaret said. "It was deeply, fundamentally wrong. And I don't know how we come back from this." The finality in her voice sent panic through Daniel's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need space from both of you. I need time to process this, to figure out what it means, to decide what kind of relationship I can have with a daughter who's been lying to me for 7 years. "Mom, please." Lena took a step forward, but Margaret held up a hand. "Don't. I can't do this right now. I can't stand here and have this conversation and pretend like everything is going to be okay just because you finally decided to be honest." Margaret's voice cracked. "I trusted you, both of you, and you repaid that trust with 7 years of deception." She turned and walked out of the kitchen, her footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. The door to the master bedroom slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael stood across from Daniel and Lena, his expression unreadable, his anger having apparently burned itself into something colder and more distant. "Dad," Daniel started. "I don't want to hear it." Michael's voice was quiet but absolute. "I don't want your apologies or your explanations or your justifications. I want you to understand something very clearly. What you did, what you both did, that's not love. That's not sacrifice. That's cowardice dressed up as nobility." The words landed like blows. Daniel felt Lena flinch beside him, felt his own defenses crumbling under the weight of his father's condemnation. "Real love," Michael continued. "Real love is honest. It's brave enough to face consequences. It doesn't hide for 7 years behind some misguided attempt at protection. You want me to believe you love each other? Then start acting like it. Stop making decisions based on fear and start making them based on truth." "We're trying," Lena said through her tears. "That's what this is. We're trying to be honest now." 7 years too late. Michael shook his head. "I need air. I need to not be in this cabin with the two of you right now." He grabbed his coat and walked out onto the porch, leaving Daniel and Lena standing in the wreckage of the kitchen with shattered ceramic at their feet and the weight of 7 years of lies pressing down on them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena turned to Daniel, her face devastated. "They hate us," she whispered. "They're hurt. That's not the same as hate." "Isn't it? Did you hear what they said? Did you see their faces?" "I saw. I heard." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her while she shook with sobs. "But they're also processing. They need time. What if they never forgive us? What if we just destroyed our relationships with our parents for nothing? It's not for nothing, Daniel said, even though the same fears were tearing through his own chest. Even if they never understand, even if they never forgive us, we're finally telling the truth. We're finally choosing ourselves. I don't want to choose myself if it means losing my mother. You're not going to lose her. She's hurt right now, but she loves you. That doesn't just disappear. Lena pulled back to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. How can you be so sure? Because I know Margaret. She's kind and she's fair. And once she's had time to think about this rationally, she'll understand why we made the choices we made. She won't like it, but she'll understand. And your dad? Daniel thought about his father's face, the disappointment and anger, and something that looked almost like grief. I don't know, he's more stubborn, but eventually, hopefully, he'll come around too. A sound from the hallway made them both turn. Emma stood there in her pajamas, her expression confused and scared. Why is everyone yelling? She asked in a small voice. Why is Grandma crying? Daniel's heart broke. In all their planning, in all their worry about how to tell their parents, they'd forgotten to prepare for this moment. Explaining to Emma what was happening, why the adults she loved were suddenly at war. He knelt down to her level. Come here, sweetheart. Emma came to him slowly, and Daniel pulled her into a hug. Over her head, he met Lena's eyes, seeing his own fear reflected back at him. They'd wanted to protect Emma from the chaos, but she was right here in the middle of it, witnessing the fallout firsthand. Adults sometimes disagree about important things, Daniel said carefully. Grandma and Grandpa are upset with me and Aunt Lena right now because we didn't tell them the truth about something. What truth? Emma asked. Remember how you said you wanted Aunt Lena and me to be friends? Yeah. Well, we want to be more than friends. We want to spend a lot more time together. And Grandma and Grandpa are upset because we didn't tell them that sooner. Emma considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old trying to understand adult complexity. Are they mad because you like Aunt Lena? They're mad because we kept it a secret for a long time. Oh. Emma pulled back to look at him. Are you and Aunt Lena going to get married like Grandpa and Grandma did? The question was so innocent, so direct, that Daniel didn't know how to answer it. He looked at Lena, who had frozen, clearly as unprepared for this question as he was. We don't know yet, Emma Bean, Lena said gently, kneeling down beside Daniel. We're just starting to figure out what we want to be to each other. But whatever happens, you're the most important person to both of us. You know that, right? Emma nodded slowly. Will Aunt Lena come over more now? Like, all the time? If that's okay with you, Daniel said. Would that be okay? Yes. Emma's face lit up despite the tension still hanging over the cabin. Can she help me with my math homework and read me stories and teach me more stuff? I'd love to, Lena said, fresh tears spilling over. I'd love all of that. Emma threw her arms around Lena's neck, and Daniel watched as Lena held his daughter like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. The image cemented something in his chest, certainty that even if their parents never forgave them, even if this choice cost them more than they'd anticipated, it was still the right choice. They were finally choosing truth, finally choosing each other, finally choosing to build something real instead of hiding behind 7 years of careful distance. The sound of the front door opening made them all look up. Michael stood in the doorway, snow on his shoulders, his expression still hard but slightly less furious than before. Emma, he said quietly, why don't you go get dressed? We're going to try sledding later if the weather holds. Okay, Grandpa. Emma released Lena and scampered off to the bedroom, leaving the 3 adults in tense silence. Michael closed the door and turned to face them. I've been thinking. Dad, Daniel started. Let me finish. Michael's voice was firm. I've been thinking about what you said, about trying to protect us. And I want you to understand something. I don't need protection. I'm a grown man who's lived through a lot of hard things, and I can handle difficult truths. What I can't handle is being lied to by my own son. I understand, Daniel said quietly. I don't think you do. Because if you understood, you wouldn't have spent 7 years treating me like I was too fragile to know that you had feelings for your stepsister. Michael paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. But I also understand something else. I understand what it's like to make choices based on fear. I've been doing it with Margaret for 2 years, staying in a marriage that wasn't working because I was afraid of hurting her, afraid of admitting failure, afraid of being alone. Lena looked up, surprise flickering across her tear-stained face. What are you saying? I'm saying you were wrong to lie to us. You were wrong to make decisions about our lives without including us. But I also understand the impulse. Michael's expression softened slightly. Fear makes us do stupid things, makes us think we're protecting people when really we're just protecting ourselves from having to be brave. I wanted to be brave, Daniel said. I wanted to tell you, but every time I tried, I thought about how happy you seemed, and I couldn't. I know. Michael held up a hand. I know, and that's why, even though I'm furious with you, even though I think what you did was deeply wrong, I also understand it. He paused. Your mother would have understood too. She would have told you that love isn't worth having if you have to hide it. The mention of Daniel's mother, gone for 15 years now, lost to cancer when Daniel was barely a teenager, hit him like a punch to the chest. Michael rarely talked about her, rarely invoked her memory in conversations like this. She would have told you to be honest, Michael continued, his voice rough with emotion. She would have told you that real love requires courage, not sacrifice. And she would have been right. I'm sorry, Daniel said, the words inadequate but necessary. I'm so sorry, Dad. Michael's face worked with emotion for a moment. Then he crossed the room and pulled Daniel into a rough hug, the kind of embrace that said more than words could. I'm still angry with you. I'm going to be angry for a while. But you're my son, and I love you, and I can't stay mad forever. Daniel clung to his father, feeling 7 years of guilt and fear finally starting to crack apart. Thank you. When Michael released him, he turned to Lena. As for you, you're not my daughter, but you've been part of this family for 7 years. And what I said to Daniel applies to you too. You were wrong, but I understand why you did it. I'm sorry, Lena whispered. I'm so sorry for lying to you. I know you are, and eventually I'll accept that apology. But right now I need you both to understand something. Michael's expression turned serious. If you're going to do this, if you're really going to pursue this relationship, then you do it honestly. No more hiding, no more pretending. You tell people the truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it might hurt, because that's what real relationships require. We will, Daniel promised. No more lying. Good. Michael glanced toward the master bedroom where Margaret had retreated. As for Margaret, she needs more time. She's not ready to have this conversation yet. Will she ever be? Lena asked, her voice small. I don't know, Michael admitted. Margaret is more tender-hearted than I am. The betrayal cuts deeper for her because she blames herself for so much already. You're going to have to be patient with her. I will, however long it takes. Michael nodded, then seemed to notice for the first time the shattered coffee mug still scattered across the kitchen floor. You should probably clean that up, and maybe think about what you're going to say to Emma, because she's going to have a lot of questions. He retreated to the master bedroom, presumably to talk to Margaret, leaving Daniel and Lena alone with the broken ceramic and the weight of consequences still unfolding. They cleaned up the mess in silence, both processing what had just happened. Michael's anger had been expected. His understanding, however conditional, had not been. It gave Daniel hope that maybe, eventually, they could rebuild what they damaged. Do you think my mom will ever forgive me? Lena asked as she dumped broken ceramic into the trash. Yes, I do. How can you be so sure? Because she loves you. And love, real love, survives hard truths. Lena leaned against the counter, exhaustion written across every line of her body. This is harder than I thought it would be. What is? Telling the truth, facing consequences. I thought once we finally admitted everything, it would feel like relief. But it just feels like, she gestured helplessly at the cabin around them. Like I've broken something I can't fix. Daniel crossed to her, taking her hands in his. You haven't broken it. We've changed it. That's different. Is it? Yes. Broken things can't be used anymore. Changed things just work differently than they did before. That's very philosophical for someone who fixes cars for a living. I contain multitudes. Daniel pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. We're going to be okay, Lena. All of us. It's going to take time, and it's going to be messy, but we're going to be okay. Promise? I promise. The rest of the day passed in careful navigation. Margaret didn't emerge from the bedroom except for a brief appearance to make sandwiches for lunch, during which she didn't speak to either Daniel or Lena directly. Michael played mediator, carrying messages, facilitating the bare minimum of communication necessary to get through the day. Emma, blessedly oblivious to most of the undercurrents, spent the afternoon building a snow fort with Daniel's help. Lena watched from the porch, wrapped in blankets, and when Emma called for Aunt Lena to come see her masterpiece, Margaret didn't object. Small victories, Daniel told himself. They were making progress in tiny increments. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Daniel found Margaret sitting alone in the living room, staring at the fire. He almost turned away, almost gave her the space she clearly wanted, but something made him stay. "Can I sit?" he asked. Margaret didn't look at him. "It's your cabin, too." He settled into the chair across from her, giving her distance but refusing to leave her alone with her hurt. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I keep replaying the last 7 years in my head," Margaret said finally. "Every family gathering, every holiday, every time I tried to get you and Lena to talk to each other. And I feel like such a fool." "You're not a fool, aren't I? I spent 7 years trying to fix a problem that didn't exist. 7 years apologizing for something that wasn't my fault." She finally looked at him, her eyes red from crying. "Why didn't you just tell me, Daniel? Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" "Because we thought we were protecting you." "From what?" "From feeling guilty. From feeling like you'd created an impossible situation by marrying my dad. From having to choose between your daughter's happiness and your marriage." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "And did it work? Did all your protecting actually accomplish anything?" "No," Daniel admitted. "It just made everything worse." "Yes, it did." Margaret's voice was soft but firm. "You know what's funny? If you'd told me 7 years ago that you and Lena had feelings for each other, I would have been surprised, maybe a little worried about the complications. But I wouldn't have been angry. I wouldn't have felt betrayed. We didn't know that. Because you didn't give me the chance to prove it. You made assumptions about how I'd react and based 7 years of decisions on those assumptions." She paused. "That's what hurts the most, Daniel. Not that you love Lena, not even that you wanted to pursue a relationship with her. It's that you didn't trust me enough to handle the truth." The accusation landed with devastating accuracy. She was right. They'd been so focused on protecting their parents from hurt that they'd never considered whether that protection was wanted or necessary. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "You deserved better than what we gave you." "Yes, I did." Margaret pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "But I also understand something that I didn't this morning. I understand what it's like to sacrifice yourself for someone else's happiness. I've been doing it with Michael for 2 years. Daniel looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been staying in a marriage that wasn't working because I didn't want to admit failure, because I didn't want Michael to feel guilty for wanting different things than I did, because I thought if I just tried hard enough, I could make us both happy." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out, I was doing the same thing you and Lena were doing, sacrificing my own truth to protect someone else." "That's different." "Is it? We all lied, Daniel. You and Lena lied about your feelings. Michael and I lied about our marriage. We all spent years performing happiness or distance or whatever we thought would keep everyone else comfortable." Margaret met his eyes. "So yes, I'm angry with you. But I'm also angry with myself for being such a hypocrite." "You're not a hypocrite. I'm a woman who's been telling my daughter for 7 years to always be honest, to always speak her truth, while I was living a lie with my own husband. If that's not hypocrisy, I don't know what is." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. The complexity of it all, the layers of deception and good intentions and fear that had wrapped around all 4 of them, felt too vast to untangle in a single conversation. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now we all try to do better. We try to be honest, even when it's hard. We try to trust each other with difficult truths." Margaret paused. "And you and Lena get to figure out if what you have is real, or if it's just been built up in your minds because it was forbidden. It's real. You don't know that yet. 7 years of longing doesn't necessarily translate into a functional relationship. Maybe not, but we're going to find out. Margaret studied him for a long moment. You really love her? Yes, I really do. And Emma? How does she factor into all this? Emma loves Lena. She's been asking for years why Aunt Lena couldn't spend more time with us. I think she'll be thrilled when she realizes what this actually means. And if it doesn't work out, if you try this relationship and it falls apart, what happens to Emma then? It was the question that had kept Daniel awake for countless nights, the fear that haunted every decision. I don't know, but I can't keep living my life based on worst-case scenarios. At some point, I have to take a risk. That's very brave, Margaret said quietly, or very foolish. I haven't decided which yet. Maybe both. Maybe. She stood up, wrapping the blanket around herself like armor. I'm going to bed. This has been the longest day of my life. Margaret. Daniel stood too, unsure what he wanted to say, but feeling like the conversation couldn't end without something more. She turned back to him, waiting. Thank you, Daniel said, for listening, for trying to understand. I'm not there yet, she warned. Understanding is going to take time. Forgiveness might take even longer. I know, but thank you anyway. She nodded once, then disappeared down the hallway, leaving Daniel alone with the dying fire and the knowledge that they'd survived the first day of truth. Barely. Messily. But survived nonetheless. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The storm had finally passed completely, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. Michael checked the weather report and confirmed that plows would reach them by afternoon, which meant by evening they could all escape the cabin and return to their separate lives. Breakfast was awkward but civil. Margaret still wasn't speaking directly to Lena, communicating through Michael or Daniel when necessary. But she didn't leave the room, didn't retreat to the bedroom, which felt like progress. Emma chattered about going home, about her friends, about school starting again next week. She seemed to have accepted the new normal with the adaptability of children, occasionally referring to Aunt Lena coming over more now like it was already established fact. Around noon, they heard the distant rumble of plows working their way up the mountain roads. By 2 o'clock, the rental company called to say the roads were passable. By 3, they were all packed and loading cars. Daniel helped Emma into her booster seat, made sure she had her stuffed rabbit, then stood in the snow watching as Lena loaded her own car. They hadn't had a private conversation all day, hadn't had a chance to process what came next now that they were leaving the forced proximity of the cabin. Lena must have been thinking the same thing because she walked over to him, her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets. So, she said. So. This is weird, right? We finally tell everyone the truth, and now we just go back to our separate lives like nothing happened? Not like nothing happened. Everything happened. We just have to figure out what comes next. What does come next? Daniel glanced toward the cabin where Margaret and Michael were doing a final check of the rooms. I drive back to my place with Emma. You drive back to yours. And tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever we're both ready, we actually go on a real date. A date, Lena repeated, like the word was foreign. Yeah, dinner, maybe a movie, normal stuff that people do when they're starting a relationship. We're not starting a relationship. We've been in one for 7 years, we just haven't been able to act on it. Then we're finally acting on it. Daniel reached out, taking her hand where their parents couldn't see from inside the cabin. No more pretending, no more distance. We do this right. What if I'm terrible at dating? What if 7 years of buildup has created impossible expectations? Then we figure it out as we go, just like everyone else. Lena squeezed his hand, her expression vulnerable. I'm scared. Me too, but I'm more scared of not trying. When did you get so brave? About 5 minutes after I realized I'd wasted 7 years being a coward. She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. Text me when you get home. I will. And Lena? Yeah? This is going to work. I know it is. How can you possibly know that? Because we've already survived the hard part. Everything else is just details. Margaret and Michael emerged from the cabin, Margaret carefully not looking at either Daniel or Lena. The drive back was going to be long and uncomfortable. 3 cars traveling in convoy down the mountain, each carrying pieces of a family that had been fractured and was now trying to figure out how to heal. But as Daniel pulled out of the driveway with Emma singing along to the radio behind him, he felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur of normal life, punctuated by extraordinary change. Daniel returned to the garage to 60-hour work weeks and the comfortable rhythm of fixing other people's problems. But now, several times a week, Lena would show up at closing time, and they'd grab dinner at the diner down the street or take Emma to the park if weather permitted. It was awkward at first. 7 years of practice distance didn't disappear overnight. They had to learn how to be around each other without the armor of hostility, had to figure out how to touch casually, how to have conversations that weren't laden with everything they couldn't say. But slowly, gradually, they found their rhythm. Lena started coming over on Wednesday nights to help Emma with homework. Daniel started driving into the city on Saturdays to meet Lena for breakfast. Emma, delighted by the new normal, attached herself to Lena with the uncomplicated joy of a 6-year-old who'd been given exactly what she wanted. Margaret remained distant. She responded to Lena's texts but didn't initiate conversation. She came to Emma's winter concert but left immediately after without speaking to Daniel. Michael reported that she was working through things in her own time, that she needed space to process the betrayal. Daniel understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. Michael, true to his word, came around faster. He started calling Daniel again, short conversations about the garage or Emma or sports, safe topics that didn't require discussing feelings. He showed up one Saturday to help Daniel fix Emma's bookshelf that had started sagging, and they worked side by side in companionable silence that felt like forgiveness. "You know," Michael said as they secured the last shelf bracket, "I've been thinking about what I said at the cabin." "Which part?" "About your mother. About what she would have said." Michael set down his screwdriver, his expression thoughtful. "I think she would have told you something else, too." "What's that?" "That 7 years isn't wasted if you learn from it. That mistakes are only failures if you don't grow from them." He paused. "You've grown, Daniel. You've learned to be braver. That counts for something." The words settled over Daniel like benediction. "Thanks, Dad." "Don't thank me yet. I'm still working on forgiving you for lying to me for 7 years. Fair enough. But I'm getting there. Slowly. It wasn't absolution, but it was progress. And progress, Daniel was learning, was sometimes the best you could hope for. 3 months after the cabin, on a cold February evening, Daniel got a text from Margaret. "Can we talk? Coffee tomorrow at 2 p.m.? His heart hammered as he replied, "Of course." "The usual place?" "Yes." "And Daniel, bring Lena." The coffee shop was crowded with Sunday afternoon customers, but Margaret had secured a corner table with enough privacy for difficult conversations. She stood when Daniel and Lena arrived, and for a long moment, the three of them just looked at each other. Then Margaret pulled Lena into a fierce hug. "I'm sorry," Margaret said, her voice muffled against Lena's shoulder. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." Lena clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry too, for everything, for lying to you." "I know you are." Margaret pulled back, keeping her hands on Lena's arms. "And I forgive you. It took me a while, longer than it probably should have, but I forgive you." "Really?" Lena's voice was small, disbelieving. "Really? You were young and scared and trying to do what you thought was right. I can't stay angry at that forever." Margaret's smile was watery but genuine. "Besides, I've spent 3 months watching you with Emma, watching you and Daniel try to figure out how to be together, and I can see it now. How much you love each other. How real it is." "It is real," Lena said. "I promise it's real." "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't trust that sooner." Margaret turned to Daniel, her expression softening. "You're good for my daughter. You make her happy in a way I haven't seen in years. That matters more than the mistakes you both made." "Thank you," Daniel said, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "That means everything." They sat down, ordered coffee, and spent the next hour talking, really talking, honestly and openly, about the past 7 years and what came next. Margaret admitted she'd been in therapy, working through her own tendency to sacrifice herself for others' happiness. She talked about the divorce proceedings, about the life she was starting to build on her own, about the freedom that came with finally being honest about what she wanted. "So what do you want?" Lena asked her mother. "Really want, without worrying about anyone else?" Margaret smiled. "I want to travel. I want to take art classes. I want to spend time with my daughter and granddaughter." She paused, looking at Daniel. "Emma is my granddaughter, right? Even if Michael and I aren't together anymore?" "Of course she is," Daniel said immediately. "You're the only grandmother she's ever known. That doesn't change." "Good, because I love that little girl." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. "And I love you too, even when I'm angry with you. That's what family means." They talked until the coffee shop closed, making plans for regular dinners, for Emma's birthday party next month, for holidays that would look different now but could still be meaningful. They didn't fix everything. Some wounds needed more time, some trust needed more rebuilding, but they made a start. And sometimes, Daniel was learning, a start was enough. 6 months after the cabin, on a warm summer evening, Daniel stood in his backyard watching Emma and Lena play catch with a softball. Emma's form was terrible, her throws wild and enthusiastic, but Lena was patient, demonstrating proper technique and laughing when Emma deliberately threw high just to watch Lena jump. "They're good together," Michael said, appearing at Daniel's shoulder with 2 beers. "Yeah, they are." "Margaret thinks you're going to propose soon." Daniel choked on his beer. "What?" "Don't act surprised. You've been dating for 6 months. Emma's already calling Lena her second mom when she thinks you can't hear. It's pretty obvious where this is heading." We're not." Daniel stopped, realizing he was protesting too much. "It's complicated. Love usually is." Michael took a drink of his beer, watching as Lena caught Emma in a surprise hug, both of them laughing. "But here's some advice from someone who's failed at marriage once. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you're absolutely certain. Just choose each other every day and trust that's enough." "Is that what went wrong with you and Margaret? You stopped choosing each other?" "We never really chose each other in the first place. We chose comfort, compatibility, the idea of a second chance. But we never chose the hard work of actually building something together." Michael's expression turned wistful. "You and Lena, you've already done the hard work. You've already chosen each other over and over again for 7 years, even when it cost you everything. Don't waste that." The words settled over Daniel like permission. "You think I should ask her?" "I think you should do whatever feels right. But yeah, for what it's worth, I think you should ask her." That night, after Emma had gone to bed and Lena was preparing to drive back to her apartment, Daniel stopped her at the door. "Stay," he said. "I have work tomorrow, early meeting." "Then leave early in the morning, but stay tonight." Lena searched his face, reading something there that made her expression soften. "Okay." They sat on the couch in Daniel's living room, the same couch where he'd spent countless nights alone over the years, and talked until 2 in the morning about everything and nothing. About Lena's desire to quit her marketing job and go back to school for teaching. About Daniel's plan to hire a manager for the garage so he could cut back his hours. About Emma's growing personality, her love of science, her fearlessness that sometimes worried Daniel. "She reminds me of you," Lena said, tucked against Daniel's side. "The way you described yourself as a kid, fearless and stubborn." "Great. I'm in so much trouble when she's a teenager." "We're in so much trouble," Lena corrected, then froze like she'd said something wrong. "We," Daniel repeated, turning the word over. "I like the sound of that." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He shifted so he could see her face properly. "Lena, I need to ask you something." "Okay." "We've been doing this for 6 months now, dating, being together, figuring out how to make this work. And I know it's only been 6 months, which probably seems fast to most people, but we've actually been choosing each other for 7 years, Lena finished. "I know." "Yeah, exactly." Daniel took a breath, feeling like he was standing on the edge of something enormous. "So I'm not asking because I think we need to rush anything. I'm asking because I'm sure. About you, about us, about what I want our future to look like." Lena's eyes were wide, her breathing shallow. "Daniel, what are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not now. We can have a long engagement, plan the wedding you want, Take our time with all the details. But I want you to know that this is forever for me. You and Emma and the life we're building together. That's what I want." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks, but she was smiling. "You don't even have a ring." "I know. This wasn't planned, but I couldn't wait anymore. I've already waited 7 years." "Yes," Lena said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." Daniel kissed her then, deep and sure, tasting salt from her tears and feeling 7 years of longing finally transform into certainty. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena was laughing. "We're really doing this," she said. "We're actually getting married. We're actually getting married. Your dad is going to say he called it." "He did call it. About 6 hours ago, actually." Lena laughed harder. "Of course he did." She paused, her expression turning serious. "Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it? The 7 years? Everything we gave up?" Daniel thought about it honestly. "I regret that we didn't tell the truth sooner. I regret the hurt we caused our parents, but I don't regret loving you, even from a distance. And I don't regret that we're here now, choosing each other with full honesty." "That's very diplomatic." "I'm getting better at this communication thing." "You are." Lena settled back against him, her hand finding his. "I love you, Daniel Cross. I love you too. I have for 8 years, and I'm going to keep loving you for the next 80 if I'm lucky." They stayed like that on the couch, wrapped in each other, planning a future they'd once thought impossible. And when morning came and Lena had to leave for her early meeting, Daniel stood at the door watching her go with the knowledge that she'd be back. She always came back now. No more pretending, no more distance, no more carefully maintained lies about who they were to each other. Just truth. Messy, complicated, beautiful truth. 2 years later, Daniel stood at the front of a small church watching Lena walk toward him in a white dress with Emma as her flower girl. Margaret cried in the front row. Michael stood beside Daniel as his best man, steady and proud. The ceremony was simple, the vows they wrote themselves painfully honest about the journey they'd taken to get here. When the officiant pronounced them married, Emma cheered louder than anyone, and the reception was filled with people who'd watched them finally stop lying and start living. That night, after Emma had been picked up by Margaret for a sleepover, after the last guest had left and they'd collapsed onto the bed in their hotel room, Lena turned to Daniel with exhausted happiness written across her face. "We did it," she said. "We did. 7 years of waiting, 6 months of dating, 2 years engaged. Was it worth it?" Daniel pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Every single second." And it was. All of it. The sacrifice, the pain, the lies, the truth, the messy journey toward honesty. All of it had led them here. To a marriage built on foundation of hard-won truth, to a family that had been fractured and healed, to a love that had survived 7 years of denial and emerged stronger. Sometimes the trying was worth the heartbreak. Sometimes the waiting made the arriving sweeter. Sometimes love required sacrifice, but the best kind of love required honesty more. And Daniel and Lena had finally learned that lesson, had finally chosen truth over protection, courage over fear, each other over everything else. It had taken them 7 years longer than it should have, but they'd made it, and that, in the end, was what mattered most.